Portage County Board of Supervisors meeting, recorded June 18, 2019.
We'll call the Portage County Board hearing to order. Roll call. If present, press yes and confirm.
Three present, 2 excused.
The Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Invocation is by Supervisor O'Brien.
Let us remember the victims from the senseless killing in Virginia Beach, and not to forget the 75-year anniversary of D-Day and all the men and women who fought in Normandy, especially the ones who paid the ultimate sacrifice. And pray for all the people that are being affected by wildfires and flooding. Amen.
Amen. Review and approval of May 21st, 2019 County Board meeting minutes. Motion by James Gifford, seconded by Supervisor Moresi. Any corrections, changes? All those in favor with aye? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Correspondence.
Those supervisors interested in attending the WCA conference, if you could fill out the registration and return to me as soon as possible. Thank you.
Members of the public who wish to address the county board on specific agenda items must register their requests at this time, with such comments subject to reasonable control of county board chairs set forth in Robert's Rules of Order. First of all, I just want to let everybody know there's additional seating in the other room, and we have it televised. The only thing is, if you wish to speak, is you would need to register and speak in here. But you're more than welcome, if you need to have a seat or would like to have a seat in the other room, to be able to watch this proceeding. So anybody who would like to speak, please step up to the podium. State your name, please.
Yeah, Chairman John Finn, Finn, 2125 Clark Street, Stevens Point. I'd like to speak on item 7 on the resolutions authorizing Dewberry to commence with design development on the 25-acre green space.
Very good. Thank you.
Michael O'Mara, 1809 Clark Street. I would like to speak on agenda item 7.
Did you get the name?
Carol Malevsky, 2125 Clark Street, on item 7. Thank you.
Eric Olson, 2025 West River Drive, and I'm also speaking on item 7, Stevens Point.
We don't need their address, do we? We don't need the address, just your name, please.
All right. Tommy Enright, Amherst, and I'm speaking on number 8.
Will Stites, I'd like to speak on number 7.
What was the first name?
Sir?
What was your first name?
W-I-L-L.
Bill. Thank you.
Tom Brown, number 7.
Eric Sheets, agenda item number 7.
Sheets?
Sir, the last name again?
Sheets.
Sheets?
Yes.
Sheets.
S-H-E-E-T-S.
Thank you.
Liz McDonald, item number 7 as well.
John Gardner, item number 7.
I should ask him to repeat his name.
Joe Sizer, item 7. Mary McComb, item 7.
McKaylee Johnson, item 7.
Is that Kaylee?
Ma'am, the first name again, please?
McKaylee.
MCHAILEY.
Thank you.
Carlene Ferrante, item 7.
Richard Ruppel, RUPPEL, item 7.
What was that last name?
Sir, she didn't quite get the last name or the
Sorry.
spelling.
Ruppel, RUPPEL.
Anybody else? All right. Presentation, Chris Holman, County Executive Building Project, Concept Design for Internal Test Fit for the Greenfield Master Plan.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's good to see everybody here. Welcome. The presentation I'm going to go through tonight is mostly going to focus on the concept, design, and the site fit to just kind of say, do the pieces that have always been under consideration for these projects fit out in this location? You'll see that there are various pieces to this, and also that there are some questions that have been asked along the way in different committee meetings that led up to this point, and so I'll also be trying to address some of those questions, just because I know that their concerns have been brought up by supervisors in the past, and so I just want to make sure that that information gets out as part of that overall kind of comprehensive look. So I'll apologize as well for the small lettering, but there are some extra copies back there. So where are we at? I think it's important to discuss where we are at because some conversations I've seen, I think, kind of don't fully appreciate exactly the step that we're in on this deliberative process. But essentially, we started by looking at the downtown concept design and cost estimates for this location where the county owns its property here. Those estimates were completed. That process was placed on hold a bit while the county explored a city proposal that came forward. And so there were kind of concurrent efforts in terms of the conversation. And really, from staff's perspective, we were looking at all the different pieces that could potentially play a role. As a part of that process, we also assessed the current law enforcement center and jail for renovation costs. That came to approximately $26.5 million. That effort was essentially to say, what's the dollar figure you're operating with if you're going to renovate the current infrastructure versus building new downtown, building new in a different location or anywhere really, so that you have, again, that kind of appreciation of all the different options that are in play. We're currently over 1 year into this iteration of the county planning process, but as you see down below, this is really kind of 20 to 25 years in the making in terms of the questions surrounding infrastructure, how to address them, and to be quite honest, I think over time you've had kind of a snowball effect where you've got a lot of issues that are coming to the fore at once, which doesn't it exacerbates the questions and the situation the county is trying to deal with. Of course, I'm emphasizing here that a decision needs to be made in order to take the next steps and get more details. I'll reference this a bit later, but I think through the committee process, there's been a lot of questions that were raised, and a lot of the answers to those questions require the whole conversation to take a step in a direction, wherever that direction is. So that's why that's up there. Just a small note, too, that there were 6 meetings that were held around the county for public input. It started at the county annex. I held meetings down in Pine Grove, Junction City, Rosholt, Amherst, and in the village of Plover. And essentially, you know, I'm elected at large. This is a conversation that affects the whole county, and so the idea was to try to figure out what were locations that would get you around the county and provide people in different parts of the county to have the opportunity to come in and share their input. Overall attendance was very low. That's not terribly surprising. I think even for the workshops we offered for the downtown location, we had, I think, 6 people attend the very first one, and no people attended the second one. So the questions around public participation, and again, that's why it's good to see everybody here, are still lingering for us because we have press releases, we have Facebook, we have websites, we have all the tools that we're trying to use and put out there. The local media covers these things because we put it out to them, but we're still, I don't think, reaching everybody. But as this conversation unfolds, the questions around that are going to have to be answered so that we can get the accurate information in people's hands so that these conversations can be more constructive. So if the county decides to build something somewhere or anywhere, I wanted to give you a look at what exactly would those phases look like. So as I mentioned, we've been working through the concept development, a site fit, and space allocation programming, which is just a way of saying the county inhabits so many square feet in all the different buildings. This is what they would require if they were going to stay there or expand their offices in the current location or build new. But you wanted to get a sense of what's the actual need, the space need, and you know, that has questions of space efficiency and stuff built into it. The phase that we're contemplating at this point is bold face there. It's the schematic design phase services. And what that is it's taking those pieces that we've been working through and plugs them into a preliminary design to kind of help narrow the focus on cost estimates for whichever direction the county might go. Even if it's, I mean, we're still at a point where we're exploring the options in the sense that this phase is not, for instance, like a point of no return. So if the county were to say, we're going to pursue schematic design phase services downtown, then that would mean that these designs would be brought together, you'd focus on that, and then that work would come back to the county board again to say, here's a much more specific body of work based on all the questions and conversations that have come through the process up to that point, and then the county board would have to approve the scope of the project and actually get into design development. Design development would be another series of conversations and meetings and questions to, again, inform and further refine any of the projects that may occur. Then, as you work through the design development, you would move to construction documents, which is a very kind of formal preliminary phase before you put out to bidding. So again, I'll note that we're very early in the conversation. There are lots of things that are still on the table, but I thought it was important for everybody to see where in the steps of the overall process we are at right now. So why are we here talking about this concept site fit for 20 to 25 acres in a greenfield location? It's a proposed property swap from the city of Stevens Point. The county did not anticipate this. We were, again, focused on what may or may not work in the downtown area, trying to assess all the different options there and costs and whatnot to see what was possible or not possible. And the offer came through from the city to entertain this property swap. That was also covered in local media, so hopefully you all understand what I'm referring to there. The swap could turn into any number of combinations, but essentially it would, if there was a property exchange of sorts as a part of this process, that's part of why this space in the greenfield location came to be. I will say too that the swap itself is something that hasn't been a real big driver in any conversations up to this point, because a lot of that conversation hinges upon what direction the county takes from here on forward. If for whatever reason you looked at the greenfield location just as a for instance and it was cost prohibitive and you couldn't do it, then the swap kind of folds in on itself and you try to figure out what pieces in there can you still address knowing that the county's not going to move forward there or downtown, again, hypothetically. Staff has been directed to carry out our due diligence on this option, which is what you're seeing here. This is the results. You know, we went to the architects and said, can you just do the same sort of work that you did for the downtown location so that we get an apples to apples look, same format, same kind of thing, so that people can comfortably, see the data and the idea as it is presented. Of course, we all know we have aged courthouses. We're here in one now. We have our out-of-compliance jail. It's been out of compliance for quite some time. Just generally deteriorating infrastructure. There hasn't been any long-term infrastructure planning that I'm aware of in terms of, really laying it out and saying this is the arc that we need to follow in order to pursue improving the infrastructure in some form or fashion for long-term questions for the county. So what that's done is, again, I mentioned earlier, kind of that snowball effect. There's a lot of things coming to the fore at once. It's not a good position to be in, and I stress this every time we talk about these things, is that no matter what we do, even if we do nothing, it's still going to cost money because things are going to continue to break and you're going to have to fix them as the infrastructure continues to deteriorate. So I just want to make it clear that, in my opinion, I think no matter where the county goes on any of this, there will be a cost involved with it. I mentioned that there's that cost of inaction. That cost of inaction is saying that, say, in 2006, if it was the right time to build then because the economy was, favoring that sort of thing, and we didn't take action then, and in the meantime, the cost to do the exact same projects have, say, doubled. So simply by doing nothing, the same concept you may have been entertaining 12 years ago doubled or tripled in price depending on different aspects. And so it's something you have to incorporate into your thinking, because again, if you decide to do nothing or some piece or whatever you decide to do, you have to incorporate what is this cost going to look like? How are the costs going to escalate moving forward? The committee has authorized the site fit assessment, which I'll get into, and I'll mention now too before I get into it that it's the whole design that you saw in the packet the supervisors had that you may have seen online, that is all very conceptual. So in the committee meetings, I kind of walked through the different pieces of it. The pieces were just to say, here are the things that have been brought up in the committees as items of concern. And so I addressed them in the drawing to make sure that everybody knew what was being talked about and to ask any questions they may have had about any of those pieces. Tonight, just for the sake of time, I'm going to go a little more quickly through that, again, because it is conceptual, and I'll hammer that home when we get to the next slides. Ultimately, other reasons that we entertain the property swap is that there were cost savings to taxpayers in the city and the county if the county, in both of our processes. So the city was looking at building a new city hall. If some sort of property swap worked out where they could take the annex over, then that's something that you could work out in that swap where they didn't have to build a new city hall. It's more space than they need, so they have room to expand in that building. Same thing for the county. You know, if you look at the downtown location, it's a very tightly hemmed in sort of location, and it continues to get more hemmed in. So when you talk about the idea of expansion, the Greenfield site, you know, one of the pros, if you were to make the list, would be that there's room to grow, like long-term, thinking 30, 40, 50 years down the line. Down here, you're going to think you're going to have to build up, and up is more costly, and it's also something you can't really very easily do 10 years after the fact. They planned the annex that way and said, well, in 15 years, we'll build a 4th floor. Well, guess what? That's never going to happen. You have to take all the HVAC, everything off the roof. You have to essentially, you know, kick everybody out of the building for a while until you could build the 4th floor and then put everything back in place. So it really requires a lot of forward thinking and looking at the big picture to say, what's the concept that you can put into play now and grow into in the future, assuming that's the direction you want to take. So I'm stressing there and underlining that this is conceptual only. The costs for this were not to exceed $12,000. We haven't got the invoice on that, but if anybody's curious, they can certainly call me and I'll give you the final number. But again, this whole thing we're going to look at now just shows whether or not the site can work. It's a little dark, so I apologize for that, but essentially this is a computer rendering looking kind of towards the northwest. This blue building here is a second 2 or 3 floor building with courthouses, so the courthouse question, can it fit? Yeah, that's one way it could fit. Similarly, the blue square down here is kind of the sports staff. If you built for support staff, that could connect that way. The bigger purple chunk to the west is the jail, juvenile detention center, Huber, dormitories, kitchen, a bunch of support, and then the red square, sorry, the green square here tucked underneath is the law enforcement center. So I'll stress just one more time that this is entirely conceptual. So the overhead look, same idea. You can see that over here is County Highway R, and down below is County HH. These roads don't exist. But if that were to go forward, actually, I should say that the eastern road there, here, according to the city's plans, is my best understanding of them, is that the utilities are slated to go down that way regardless of what happens in this conversation. But again, you could reorient that, you could wipe the slate clean and start all over, but it's important to get the kind of professional assessment to show that the thing can work. This is just highlighting the 25-acre size. And questions of expansion, again, you know, as one of the concerns, downtown doesn't have as much room to move. You would have all this room here for everything we know we need now. There's also a 15-acre parcel to the north. We haven't talked about that, but just conceptually, if you're looking at it, you could say, well, if you needed to expand into something somewhere down the road, that space is there and something you could talk about as part of your process. Again, there have been no discussions about it. It's just highlighting one of the differences between the locations. This drawing is a kind of a watercolor conceptual work. There's a lot of detail to it, but again, the detail's there to show that it's from the architect's point of view. They're taking all the potential expansions into account. They're taking, this portion here is a jail cell, or jail pod that has 144 cells in it. There's nothing to say that that's the pod that we would build. There's nothing to say it would be 144 beds in there. It's just to say that if you wanted to, that could be a pod that would look that way. Same for the Huber area and dorms. There's 96 beds there. Maybe you only needed 36. Those would be the kinds of questions that you would get the answers to as you move forward with this kind of conversation. And again, regardless of location, if you're building downtown, you'd be asking the same thing, like, well, how many beds can we build here? How many Huber would we want? These sorts of details are beyond where we're at this point. Same thing with the retention ponds. People have asked about those. You could handle stormwater in an entirely different way, and they wouldn't have to exist. So anyway, the long and short of it is that the architects have done the due diligence on their end to show that based on everything that they know from our our allocation programming and the pieces of the conversation that we've been talking about for 20 some odd years, they all could show up there if you wanted them to. So this is the point where I'm getting into questions and some answers. And it's important because as we've talked about all of these things, there's been questions that have come up along the way that are very good questions about youth justice, about the jail, about any of the pieces of this that I think are important. They're not exactly on the periphery, but they help to inform the overall conversation. And so it made sense to me to take some time to kind of walk through the questions that have come up, and then also to say, here's what I found out up to this point in time. So one of the issues that was brought up is the potential neighbors in the business park location. What do they think? So we reached out to city staff and we asked them. I've also reached out to the manager of the business park out there, Bill Schofield. He also manages the Portage County Business Park. And it's not to say that there isn't any concern or complaint out there, but none have been expressed up to this point. So we're unaware of anything at this point. Again, that's not to say that somebody's not sitting out there wondering why this is even being discussed. It's just to say that no one has made their concerns aware in that area. The proximity to people. This was a question that came up very early in the conversation about the downtown location, the Greenfield location, or any other location you might entertain. Like, who are the users of the facility? What's closest to people? What's easier to get to? And so what I had County GIS do is just plot, and I didn't really know where it was going to end up. I just said, could you plot the center of the county by both population and geography? And that would just be two reference points that everybody could say, well, here's where we are now. Here's the proposed location. Here are both of those center points, and you can kind of see where they are in relation to one another. So that was just something that, again, it came up numerous times, so I felt it made sense to address it. Depending on the route, the proposed location is 5 to 6 miles away from the annex, so 13 to 16 minutes from the county annex. That's according to Google Maps. Property values. This is a question that often comes up because you're talking about business parks, you're talking about industrial parks, you're talking about just property in general, and even the way property is handled typically for industrial parks is like price per square foot. It's not necessarily per acre, which a lot of us are probably more familiar with. Nevertheless, reached out to Bill Schofield and others again to say, what does this look like? How do you conceptualize or discuss value, property value in these locations? And the answer there was just to say that, realistically, the smarmy answer would be to say it's worth nothing because the city owns it, right? There's no tax base from municipal property. But if you were going to sell the property out there, then the raw land value in this location, that would be before improvements, would be roughly $32,000 to $35,000 per acre. If you compared it to the Village of Amherst Business Park, out there it's $30,000 per acre. So it's roughly in the market for this region in terms of what are people spending to develop in these locations. East Park Commerce Center, this is the location we're talking about. Each one of these industrial parks and business parks has a unique approach to how they handle these things. But the city, the way they run this particular one, is that the questions of infrastructure and what a particular developer might need are a part of the conversation with whoever the developer is. So if you came in and you needed this amount of infrastructure for whatever your development was, that would be part of that discussion, and then they would facilitate that as part of the agreement. to be very clear, we haven't discussed any of that at this point, again, because we're still in a pretty early phase in terms of the overall discussion. Central Transportation. This is a hat tip to Supervisor Gifford, who does a great job of making sure that we're contemplating these questions of how do people get to these places. So we contacted Central Transportation and just said, what's the process if you wanted to get a new stop in a location? And basically there's a transportation coordinating committee that you would go to and say, hey, we have a new stop, whether that's in Plover or wherever, and here's where we'd like it to be, and then they would deliberate, and then it would go through the typical process for any other stop. What you see on the wall is one of the regular routes that currently operates, and it's a year-round route. It runs from 6:45 in the morning to 5:40 p.m. Monday through Friday, and it runs right through the area. The whole bottom portion there where you see Walmart, that's the Crossroad Commons area. Up in the top corner here is where Central Transportation is, and the star just south of there is the proposed location. So if you actually distance from Central Transportation to where we're talking about, it's less than a mile. And I only say that to say that, to me, we haven't had any specific conversations, but it would seem pretty logical that if you're less than a mile away from the headquarters of the Central Transportation facility, that if you needed a spot somewhere out there, that it would be not a very difficult thing to work through. There's already 10 stops out there. 212 is the closest stop to the star. There's 2 transfer stations out there as well. So the point is that there is a decent presence anyway of the current infrastructure for transportation that's out there, and that could be asked to see if it could facilitate the kind of transportation you'd want if you needed to move from somewhere else in the city along the bus routes to get out there and do your business. That's not to say that there's no room for improvement on all this. I agree with Supervisor Gifford in the sense that whether it's regional transit or otherwise, there's plenty of things that we could do to try to improve just the overall sense of this question in the area. More questions and more answers. Again, youth justice concerns were brought up by a county board supervisor at the last Pace and Properties meeting. It's a great question, very good intention, trying to figure out where is this coming from, like what does Portage County really do? And I think that this is probably one of the most underappreciated parts of Portage County when you talk about the jail or youth justice center, is that we have a tremendous amount of programming that is trying to facilitate people in terms of keeping them out of the system. So what follows is just for informational purposes, just because, again, I think it's important that people hear this. But, you know, our Portage County has an average daily population of 6 to 7 individuals in the Youth Justice Center. 5.5 of them, again on average, are elsewhere in the state. So in our facility, we average 1.3. So that, you know, probably 1 to 3 people over the course of the year. But the individuals who are in this center have a very highly structured environment. Some of the services I listed there, again, just to say, there are a lot of efforts going into trying to rehabilitate and help people through whatever situation they found themselves in and why they may be in that particular context at that given time. So school is held with regular school hours. Teachers come from the school district. CAP Services comes in 3 times a week, and on the weekends, they help with life skills and cooking classes. The Children's Hospital of Wisconsin comes in for therapy. RSVP, which is a volunteer kind of grandparent program, which is really neat. They come in twice a week. There's a YMCA fitness class. A volunteer formerly with NAMI, which is the National Alliance for Mentally Ill, comes in every other Saturday. And there's arts and crafts as well. Again, there are other programs that are held, and there's another one I'll talk about briefly. But the point is that when we talk about what are our youth going through if they find themselves in these situations, it's important to remember these points because, again, from the judges all the way through the whole system, everybody's focus is really pointed in this direction. And I think it's not acknowledged often enough. Just one other program, it's of note because it's a weekend diversion program. It's another highly structured program designed to keep people out of a secure detention facility. Portage County actually got a federal grant for this program in 2017, and it's helped reduce the number of people who are held in that secure detention. So why 1.3? It's because of programs like this that route people through more appropriate paths, let's say, because studies continue to show that detention doesn't have the same sort of benefit that some people might argue. Realistically, it's the programming around any given individual who comes in which helps move them through the system per se, but also through their own individualized process and the program. So it can be very catered to them in some ways. Sorry. There are other highly structured programs in the area. I couldn't list them all, but suffice it to say that we're doing very good work. More about the jail, and it's a mandatory jail, and again, I'm only referring to that because it's based on statute. I think the emphasis obviously is on corrective sort of behaviors, trying to get people to rehabilitate and try to get them, same as the Youth Justice Center, through the system in a way that doesn't, if it's a minor offense, that maybe you don't end up on CCAP or something that, so that doesn't go with you for the rest of your life when people look up your name. Or there's deferred prosecution programs where you can go through different programs to kind of improve your situation. But what I wanted to note here is that I serve on the Justice Coalition Executive Committee, and we have conversations about all kinds of pieces to this puzzle. Cashless bond is one of them that we're really grappling with now because it's sort of an inevitability down the road. And so trying to be proactive and get ahead of that curve, it makes a lot of sense. But we do a lot of things in the county, and so what I said, well, what if we kind of provided a policy home in a way that would help institutionalize the Justice Coalition, which is already very institutionalized. It's been around for 20 years, doing amazing work. And we had like a decarceration plan that could serve as like the placeholder for all these programs that I'm referencing. If people said, well, how does Portage County work with incarceration, decarceration? Well, here's the plan, and here's what we do. And things could go in and there, out of there, depending on what we continue to do or stop doing in the future, or things we adopt as we move forward. But it's a conversation in its early stages, but I've got some support right now, and what I think we'll see is that on the executive committee, we'll take it up at our next meeting, and then hopefully I would say that in the fall meeting for the Justice Coalition, this concept of a decarceration plan would be discussed there, and that's with all the stakeholders in the system looking at it. I know I'm belaboring the point a little bit, but again, these issues come up quite a bit, rightfully so, but I wanted to try to capture as much as I could while I had everyone's attention. And also, I just feel very strongly that the programs and social work provided by the Sheriff's Office, DA, the courts, and everyone else is a part of this conversation that needs to come in at all the correct spots along the way, and I don't think it has been up to this point. So what is my agenda? In this position, people think you have all kinds of agendas, but I wanted to just be very intentional and say, here's what my agenda is. So real clearly, again, in terms of process, like my role and the role of staff is we react to the decisions of the county board here. So we work with wherever those decisions take us. Obviously, my point of view on this is that it's a collaborative partnership. We communicate, we work with each other so that everybody gets their fingerprints on whatever the issue is, and at the end of the day, everybody can see a part of themselves in that end result. So all that aside, the decisions are made by the county board. It's still our job as staff to make recommendations to the board based on the most objective and accurate information we have at the time. Where that recommendation goes, sometimes it's followed, sometimes it's not. There's lots of good conversations that happen as a part of that process, but I just wanted to be very clear about where does staff fit in all this. I'm also trying to err on the side of more transparency, which is why I asked the question about how else can we reach out to the public. There's also get information into the hands of people. I write those pieces in the Gazette and City Times and the Metro Wire on purpose. I want to give information to the public that doesn't have a particular angle. I may stray from objectivity. No one's truly objective, but I try to be as objective as I can so that the public can get the information and decide what they think about it. I've received, aside from everybody who's here today and the 3 phone calls I got today, prior to today I had received fewer than 10 phone calls, emails, or in-person contacts about any of this that I didn't initiate myself. And so again, that's why I'm glad to see everybody here in the sense that you're trying to get people to, you're trying to engage with the public, and a lot of times it doesn't work, whether it's in the annex or in the outline area. Attendance is typically very low. So in summary, my agenda and staff's agenda is the deliberative process or the committee process. It's very important that we play a very constructive role every step along the way in that. Again, we make better decisions, we make them together, with everyone operating with the same accurate information. I talk to the county board supervisors quite a bit, like reach out to me if you have any questions. We don't have to discuss everything at a meeting at the last minute. There's all kinds of opportunities where people can reach out, have a phone call, drop by the office, and any of their concerns we can discuss them. But again, I think that my emphasis is on dialogue, not on debate. It's like what is right about any particular situation is more important to me than who is right or who may win a particular argument. Debate, I think, is just generally it tends to keep a division where dialogue implies a back and forth, which is a more constructive way to handle any sort of question you might be facing. So in conclusion, my ultimate agenda is progress, some form of progress and long-term planning. I ran on that as part of my election campaign to say there are lots of lingering questions at the county level. I think there are lots of good possible solutions that are out there, but my goal is to help the board and others have the conversations that generate the kind of progress we need for getting the answers to these questions so that we don't keep coming back to this point over and over again and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to get the same information just 2 or 3 years or 6 years or 10 years later. So whereas we have a decision to make, whereas clauses are always fun, the site fit that I talked about here on this presentation is just a starting point showing what could be possible. Again, I'm repeating myself, but I just want to make that clear. You could erase everything that was in that diagram and draw it from scratch with the architect sitting across from you and come up with a whole new look. That's the point of the next steps. And again, whichever direction you head in, is that you need that conversation to get the details and answers that you're looking for. The site fit is only a starting point showing what could be possible. I boldface that. It's a little smart alecky, I know, but again, I just want to drive that point home. The cost of doing nothing, as I referenced earlier, it includes the costs we know of now, increases in those costs over time, and there's a real potential for fines or other reactive costs that should the Department of Corrections or others come calling, like they did in Adams County. And if you're not familiar, Adams County got a phone call from Department of Corrections saying, you must do these things or we will shut you down in 6 months. So rather than having a plan, right, that you've articulated and said, here's what we're going to do. Now you're in a position of having to create something on the fly and spend, they were looking at $14 or $15 million just to band-aid the situation so that they could not be shut down. Because if they do shut you down, you still have to handle everything. It just becomes a logistical nightmare. Because now you don't have a jail, so where do people go? How do they get there? How do they get back and forth? It's a serious issue. So the point here is that we need to be proactive about these things. There will also be unforeseen costs that have to be dealt with, absent any decisions on how to move forward in any particular direction. We all know that, but just as a for instance, the healthcare center recently found out that one of the mains going out to the city line in the street is having some issues. So we brought people in to look at it, and it's aging infrastructure. It's another piece that we haven't found a great solution for yet, though there's a lot of work being done toward that end now. Nevertheless, we're going to have to spend probably somewhere around $100,000 to fix that pipe, even though it may have nothing to do with what the ultimate plan is for the healthcare center. So proactive approaches could probably save you some money. This is just a graphic representation, again, of where we are at. There are doors we need to walk through. I found a picture with 6 of them, so I came up with 6 options. There are more options. This is not comprehensive. So if you went through door number 1, you would say, this is all hypothetical. You could build all at once, meaning all of the pieces, or you could phase the construction in the downtown location. That's a possibility. You could build all at once or in phases in the Greenfield location. You could build pieces in the downtown location and others in the Greenfield location. Like there's movable pieces here at this point. You can choose to build nothing and say, we're not building anything, we're just going to spend the $50 million to renovate current infrastructure and have the same space, which is inefficient. This building, for instance, is very inefficient for the judges, for the public. It's not safe. You'd have to, that would be one of the outcomes of investing in this, but point being that you're grappling with something that's been an issue for you for quite some time, but now you're just dumping $15 million into it, hoping that buys you more time until the next issue arises. You could do nothing. You could also do something that no one has talked about in the last 25 years. So the conversation we've been talking about, it's been focused on where the county board has been. Where have these conversations gone? What are the pieces that have been in play? That's what we've been grappling with, is that trajectory over 20 years, let's call it, and looking at each of those pieces to figure out what solutions might be had. Uh-oh, more doors. So there's more doors. This is the last slide, don't worry. But it's just to show that there are more doors we're going to have to walk through again to get to the next phase. You saw that in the very beginning that we have 3 very distinct phases in front of us, but there's also tons of decision points along the way that would happen at the committee level, at the county board level, and as those decisions are made, it helps to inform any of the other pieces in play, which are, there's a lot of them in play with this in terms of what is up in the air and what may or may not happen and what hinges on this decision or that decision. So it's not the end of the discussion. So plenty of discussion to be had. I threw my contact info up there, but you all know where I work. Some of you know where I live. That's public information too. But anyway, do you have any questions? Do you want me to call them, or do you want to call them?
Shirley was talking.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Supervisor Neville.
I had a question about the $12,000 that we authorized last month. That was spent to get us to tonight. And going forward, there wasn't any dollar figure in what we received for tonight.
Correct. So the questions, like the $12,000 figure was a not to exceed figure. So the question I posed to the architects was, can you at least give me a not to exceed number for the work? So my sense of the work that was completed is going to come in way under 12,000. They were just ballparking, and they were also, because of some miscommunication, not from me, but from our intermediary, thinking that there was more being asked of them. So they got through the work pretty quickly. So the $12,000 max, which again will come under that, gets us to this point. Moving forward, and again, this is regardless of where the decision takes us, the money that was set aside was in the original resolution. So this was back in April 24th of last year when we said, we're going to move forward with architects. We've earmarked money for the work we know that they're going to do, wherever they're going to do it, to talk about whatever they're going to talk about based on our back and forth with them. And that figure is contingent upon the decisions again. So like if you said, well, we want to have a full schematic design, let's say, of the entire campus in exquisite detail, and then all the other pieces. I mean, you could get really grand with this and it would cost a lot of money, or you could get very specific. Like you could, like the county board could say, we just want to build a fleet garage. Again, just as a hypothetical, right? Well, okay, the fleet garage would cost you this, and that's it. And we've already earmarked that money in the from the capital improvement plan, and any money that's beyond the amount that's already earmarked would be reimbursed back to the county through the borrowing process. Of course, the borrowing process implies you're much further along in the conversation and you're saying, we want to build this. And so to answer your question, yeah, there's the work that architects do comes at a high cost, without a doubt. You know, we are, I don't know, 4 or 5 studies into this already. We've spent hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on past conversations. So no matter what decision we make, the work that goes into that is going to cost money. But my hope is that whatever that dollar figure ends up being, based again on the work we ask them to do, how many hours it is, and so on and so forth, that work then translates into that decision, which gives you the starting point for the plan. And that's what I've always said to the county board when we talk about this over the last 6 months is, whatever the decision is on this issue, that for me is day one of the plan. I nest that down in my little timeline, and I move forward and say, here's the plan moving forward, so that in the future board supervisors, future county execs, anybody in staff, anybody in the public can say, here's the plan they put together. Now they can pick it apart if they want, but the point is they'll have an articulated plan that they can engage with rather than just a pile of information or a timeline of all kinds of different actions that took place that don't really give you any particular direction or any sort of understanding of where you've been or why you were there. Did that answer your question?
Well, no. No, it didn't, because what I was thinking about is looking at the resolution we have coming up tonight. If it were passed, there's not a dollar figure. So the things you're talking about are things that then have to happen to shape everything. But, you know, in my role in voting, I'm real interested to know, and it looks like we have a change of wording about what's being done.
Yep.
You know, is what kind of, you know, I understand what you're saying, and so maybe it can't be answered. Maybe that's a good answer.
Yeah, the next step in any direction on this is going to give you the more kind of focused in look at what you're wanting, and that look is going to give you more specific square footage, overall size, any of the things that would be in the project itself come at a price, say, per square foot. So if you said, well, we're going to build something that's 100,000 square feet, that would be quantitatively different than something at 300,000 square feet. So not knowing whether the county's planning is one of those, it would be wrong for me to say it's going to be the amount of money for 100,000 square feet, because that's presumptuous on my part. Maybe the county says we want to build 200,000 square feet. So if it's $4 a square foot, you do the math, and that's what the cost would be. And the county board, when they made the decision last April, the decision implied the earmarking of the money to set aside for wherever direction it would go from there. But yeah, you're right that there's more money that would be spent. Certainly, as you work through the process, if you ever get to construction documents or at the end of design development, that's more money. But again, that's a lot more work that you've had done based on what you're asking the architects to do for you. And I'm sorry I can't give you a real more specific answer, but the fiscal note in the resolution says what it says, because it's just, we're not sure what the county board is going to decide, but we've earmarked money. It's not spent yet, but some of it's spent, but there's other money there waiting to see what steps will be taken.
Thank you.
Supervisor Splinter.
I have more comments later, but the one I'd like to just delve into a little bit on your population center. I represent District 12, which are 3 wards in Town of Hall, so we're kind of on the outlying area. And in the last couple elections, I just looked roughly, you know, there's 60 to up to 70% of the voters in each election are non-city voters, and we're here to not so much, you know, look at the vested interest of one particular community as such, I mean, Stevens Point, or Clover, or Amherst, or Town of Hall. We're here to look at a common sense approach for the entire county. Again, going back to the population, do you know what the population total is and what percentage in the city of Stevens Point and those that are outlying areas?
I mean, the overall census is between 70 and 71,000. You know, voters, I think you're just over 53,000. In terms of the city, it's roughly a third of the population. So it's, you know, you're looking at, yeah, that's an approximate figure. And the city, you know, the city is bigger than people think it is. But yeah, the GIS, they just plug in the formulas to say, based on where everyone is, based on the census data, where is the center for those locations. And then the other is taking the actual geographic boundaries of the county and saying, all right, based on those boundaries, where is the geographic center? They're close. And again, it was just a concern that was brought up very early on, and so I just felt it made sense to include that as part of the conversation. And these questions could come up in committees or between meetings. You know, like I can talk to 12 supervisors before I trigger a quorum, right? So any of these questions I can bring to each meeting and have addressed and have fully formed with participation from supervisors or the public, for anybody really, so that part of the conversation is brought into the fold, so to speak.
Supervisor Bob Gifford.
Yeah, I appreciated seeing the part about transportation, mass transit being addressed in there. However, that was a big concern of mine. I got 3 paragraphs here that are concerns. However, we have an adequate transit system, but it's not what I would call a robust transit system, right?
Nor would I.
And we're essentially going to be getting ourselves into a situation of being a dual downtown city. And that would call for a robust mass transit system, in my opinion. And the concern goes to the, not so much where people live, but what part of the socioeconomic class system you live in, right? So I always keep saying our low-income, disabled, elderly, and student populations are not as well served as they would be in a robust system. And this also is something we can't address at the local level. We know that. There's just no money, right? So with the Counties Association coming up in September, I would urge you to give Lieutenant Governor's office a call and invite him to come there and meet with some of us, because his main concerns for the state are sustainability and equity, which, you know, loosely speaking, social justice, right?
Yep. So
if we are going to go this route, then we absolutely have to have a robust mass transit system, because despite 10 years of recovery, we still have an enormous low-income population that doesn't seem to be recovering. So that's one of my main concerns about this. But thanks for addressing it in the packet.
Yeah, of course, and I'm more than happy to work with you on that. Also, I think, you know, I've been at some of the committee meetings that talk about these issues, and it's always the chicken or the egg, too. So, and just an objective assessment, you say, well, whether the county was in there or say the business park just became thriving in all kinds of other ways and people are working out there, I think that's part of the chicken egg question. It's like, if things manifest there, then that would definitely be questions you'd want to bring to the Central Transportation to say, all right, you know, it's not perfect, but we're trying to improve, and here are ways that we can take steps towards that improvement.
Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. County Executive. This is the first time in a large public meeting that I've heard discussion of decarceration, and I think the first time I really heard someone talk about it at length has been Supervisor Moa, who is passionate about that. I applaud Judge Pflugar and the Justice Coalition for the work that they've been doing. But as we start thinking about a facility in which we're going to incarcerate individuals, if we don't take into consideration the trends related to cashless bail, elimination of Huber to almost all degree, and in that decarceration plan, and how we're looking at different methods of managing people who break the law and simply need the right kind of resources. And to Supervisor Moa, I always applaud her for her work and all that she's done, and that commitment to that, and to the Justice Coalition. Again, this is the first time I've heard it in County Board, and this is primarily because of our committee system that is very siloed. We have to have that conversation, because a lot of this is driven, a lot of this need for this expansive complex is driven by this 144-bed facility and all of these other resources needed for corrections. So absent that solid discussion, that solid plan for decarceration, I'm going to have a hard time supporting a lot of this.
Well, I'll just add that the work on that's already being done. And I don't know if Judge Pflugar is here or not, but and I'm not being facetious, I think that the idea that I broached was to just say, and it was certainly inspired by Supervisor Moa's conversations on a number of things, which again, I thought were very good to bring up and shine some light on them. I think that the work is being done. Again, the 144-bed figure, it's all conceptual. If you design something, I mean, granted, the conversation is many, many stakeholders. So the Justice Coalition's everyone, Department of Corrections, probation, parole, sheriffs, city, pullover, everybody involved, and they're very active in these conversations right now. So, and it's always been going on, which is why I hammered on it here. It's something that almost never sees the light of day, to your point. So I wanted to raise that up and say, this has been going on for 20 years. These conversations are happening right now. The DA is very passionate about the cashless bond questions and how to work with that moving forward. So I don't think that we're in a position where we have to have those conversations in the future. I think they're having those conversations right now, and we can fold those into any of the concerns or questions as part of any process referencing the J word in wherever it may be located, depending on what county board decides to do. But I echo your sentiments in terms of it's important to talk about these things.
Anybody else? Thank you. Chris?
Thank you very much.
Confirmation of county executive appointments. If there's no objections, I'll take them all in one motion as printed. Motion by Matt Jakowski, seconded by Supervisor Johnson. Any corrections or changes? All those in favor with aye? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Number 1, comprehensive plan amendment, Town of Grant.
Resolution 127, 2018, 2020, submitted by the Planning and Zoning Committee, amending the Town of Grant Comprehensive Plan.
Motion by Supervisor Barry Jakowski, seconded by Supervisor Gussel. Discussion. All those in favor with aye? Opposed? Well, I'm sorry. Push vote. Push yes. And those opposed, push no.
Twenty-three ayes, 2 excused, resolution adopted.
Number 2, authorizing amendment for Microsoft to provide Office 365 email service.
Resolution 128, 2018, 2020, submitted by the Finance Committee. This resolution approves a contract with Microsoft, and I would offer a technical amendment to include the date of the county board meetings.
Motion by Supervisor Dodge, seconded by Supervisor Padaki. No, okay.
That for the amendment, Mr. Chair?
Yes, it's all included in there.
Thank you.
Those in favor vote yes, and opposed no.
Twenty-three ayes, 2 excused, resolution adopted.
Number 3, resolution awarding the sale of $10,890 million general obligation promissory note series 2019A.
Resolution 129, 2018, 2020, submitted by the Finance Committee, approving the sale of the promissory notes. This resolution requires a majority vote only.
Motion by Supervisor James Gifford, seconded by Supervisor Larry Rakowski.
So the resolution that's before you tonight, the one that was in your packet was draft, because when we sell notes, that happens on the day of the county board meeting, so that happened this morning. If you recall, in late spring, we passed 4 resolutions, 2 reimbursement resolutions and 2 intent resolutions. They were for 2 projects. One was a highway improvement project, highway, road, and bridge projects. And the other resolutions involved a highway building remodel and renovation project. What we decided to do, because it was in our best interest and it was also in a way to save some money, is we took those 2 projects, we put them together, and we did the sale of the notes as a whole to cover both those projects. I have Kristen Hansen here this evening, who's going to walk through kind of today's sale. We do have a little presentation, but if we can't get it to come up, we'll still give you the highlights of the sale. It actually was a great sale today. One of the things, well, I guess I'll just turn it over to Kristen. She can share that information with.
For the record, my name is Kristen Hansen. I'm a director at PFM out of the Milwaukee office. And as Jennifer indicated, we took bids today at 10 o'clock in the morning, similar as we've done in the past for your borrowings. We received 4 bids. The best bid was Baird out of Milwaukee with a true interest cost rate of 1.59. The market's been very interesting lately. With some of the fears of the trade wars and things like that, and so, and talks of an inverted yield curve, but what that meant for you is interest cost savings. You received 3 other bids. You received second place, or the cover bid, was BOK Financial Securities out of Dallas, FTN Financial Capital Markets out of New York, and then Hutchinson Shockey out of Chicago. So you had interest from around the country. Just kind of historically, if you look at what has happened, Baird has won your last 3 issues, including this one, and Bankers Bank won in 2016. Because the issue was over $10 million, they're not considered bank qualified, so Bankers Bank did not bid because there was no benefit to them purchasing those. Since I don't have the, it's okay. We've been kind of, working the borrowing similar. You do the notes every year, 2 to 4 year terms to kind of plan forward to future borrowings for addressing your capital and highway improvement needs. We did have a rating call with S&P. They affirmed your AA rating, and essentially when you read the rating report, it's almost verbatim from every year. They talk about your very strong budgetary flexibility, your strong management, your very strong liquidity, your very strong debt and contingent liability position, your strong institutional framework. They talk about an adequate economy, and that's nothing that you can control. So there's a lot of, you have a very strong credit in the market.
Anybody have any questions? Supervisor Barry Jakowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you give us the range of interest rates that there was? You said we had 4 bids?
Yes. Thank you. So I actually have it here, and if it would have been on the screen. So the
your story.
So the Baird had a 1.598553. The cover bid, or second place bid, was 1.663252. FTN Financial Capital Markets was 1.703292. And Hutchinson Shockey was 1.767616.
Past the decimal point. Supervisor Zdroik.
There wasn't any description then on if we call a note or we call it early?
It is only 4 years in length, so there's no.
There is
no call date.
Any other questions? Supervisor Johnson?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, ma'am. Is this in line what you're seeing on other bonds from other municipalities with AA ratings?
Because this is such a short term, we're seeing very favorable rates. Yes, it's 4 years. We did sell a couple weeks ago for Sussex. They were about 2.56, but it was a 15-year term. There was a number of issues in the market today. However, they were bank qualified, some of them, and they went out, 20 years. So,
thank you.
Supervisor Laddick.
Okay, I just had a question on the pricing. It looks like FTN Financial Capital is lower in price but higher in interest. I just want to know how you equate that.
So when we calculate the true interest cost, we take into account the coupons, the premium that they offer, as well as the yields on those maturities. And so the
winning underwriter Braillard had that lower TIC. So it was interesting. The first 3 bids actually had the same coupons on all 4 maturities, 2%, 2%, 2%, 3%, but you got a higher premium on theirs.
Anybody else? Supervisor Johnson?
Sorry. This one's probably for Director Josie. Is in the segregated debt fund service, I'm sure we have, no question that we have that. Is this, do we have separate debt funds, or is it accumulation of all the various debts and then accounted out individually with those? So from year to year, is it a separate fund, or we just, you do your magic with your accounting and keep track of all that?
It's one fund. We have one debt service fund, and for every series of notes or bonds, we track them separately. This one will be a little unique because some of it's highway projects and some of it's government projects. We will take the total cost based on today's sale and based on the total project cost, and then we will divvy that out between highway and the government side. But in terms of the notes and the repayment of the notes, we track every issuance as its own kind of separate line item. We track the principal and interest payments separately for all of those.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Now we have to take care of some. We have a draft in the packet, and because this is a item where finance approved the sale of it, and we just had the sale of it, the numbers were not in the packet. They were left on your desk. This is the one time when you can have something ahead of time. But I need a motion to substitute this packet with the new numbers that's on your desk for the one that's in your packet that was mailed to you. Motion by Supervisor James Gifford, seconded by Supervisor Barry Jakowski on the substitution. Any discussion? That I'll take in a voice vote. All in favor with aye? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Now back to the original motion. Any questions? So all of those in favor with the new numbers and the substituted numbers in your packet, vote yes, and if approve, and no to, and then confirm.
Twenty-three ayes, 2 excused. Substituted resolution adopted.
Thank you.
Number 4, authorizing a final reconciliation of fiscal year 2018 for all county funds.
One more housekeeping. Resolution 130, 2018-2020, submitted by the Finance Committee. This resolution authorizes 2018 final reconciliation.
Motion by Supervisor Droik, seconded by Supervisor Laddick. Discussion. All those in favor vote yes, and opposed no.
Three ayes, 2 excused. Resolution adopted.
Number 5, resolution establishing November 4th, 2019 as official annual meeting date of the Portage County Board of Supervisors for 2019.
Resolution 131, 2018-2020, submitted by Executive Operations Committee, setting November 4th as your annual meeting date.
Motion by Supervisor O'Brien, seconded by Supervisor Gussel. Discussion. All those in favor with yes and opposed no.
23 ayes, 2 excused, resolution adopted.
Number 6, authorization for 2019 amendment contracts over 100,000 and subsequent budget adjustments for the Health and Human Service Department.
Resolution 132, 2018-2020, submitted by Health and Human Services Board and the Finance Committee. This resolution authorizes amendments to the 2019 Health and Human Services contracts and subsequent budget adjustment and will require a 2/3 supermajority vote.
Motion by Supervisor Dubek, seconded by Supervisor Medine. Discussion.
Technical amendment.
Yes, sir.
On the second whereas, it needs to be changed to say, whereas the original contract amount of $25,000 with Heartland Healing with Horse LLC was approved by the Health and Human Services Board on November 12, 2018. So you're crossing off Heartland Equestrian LLC and replacing it with Heartland Healing with Horse LLC.
Supervisor Dubek, would you like to include that amendment in the attachment as well?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll need a second then to that amendment. Second by Supervisor Johnson. Discussion? All those in favor with a voice? Aye. Opposed? Amendment carried. Now back to the original motion. Any other discussion? All those in favor vote yes and opposed no.
Supervisor Dubek?
Yes.
Finish.
23 ayes, 2 excused, amended resolution adopted.
Number 7, authorizing BWBR Dewberry to commence with the design and development of the 20 to 25 acres of green space.
Resolution 133, 2018-2020, submitted by the Space and Properties Committee and Capital Improvement Economic Development Committee. This resolution authorizes BWBR to commence design development.
Motion by Supervisor Dodge, seconded by Supervisor Don Jankowski. Supervisor Dodge.
Everyone received a change for the resolution on their desks. I'd like to amend the resolution language authorizing BWBR Dewberry to commence with the schematic design phase services, slashing the design development on 25 acres of green space. At the very bottom, now therefore be it resolved that Portage County Board of Supervisors hereby approves the schematic design phase services, slashing design development of and adding on 25 acres of green space. And the last, be it further resolved that the schematic design phase services slash this design development is and are being pursued by County of Portage for its long-term planning purposes.
I have a motion. I need a seconded by Supervisor Splinter. Any other discussion on the amendment? County Exec Holman.
I just wanted to offer a point of clarification for everybody, in case you're wondering where it's coming from. It was an error on my part, and Supervisor Medine actually brought this up at Space and Properties about what exactly are we talking about. And you saw that referenced in the presentation on the concept piece, in the sense that design development would imply a further step down the road. I contacted the architects and said, what, from your point of view, is exactly the way to describe the phase we're at, so that that language would be accurate in the resolution, and that's the language that you see in front of you.
All right. We have a motion and a second on just the amendment, and I will take a voice call. All those in favor with aye? Aye. Opposed? Back to the original resolution. Yes. Yes, and we'll call the people out. Everybody has 3 minutes. We'll start a timer. Please be courteous to that. And then as well, if someone else has already said what you want to say, please don't repeat it. Just say state that you're in favor or opposed to something. We don't need to hear it over and over. So the first person.
John Finn.
I know many of you are friends with many of you. To those who I haven't met, my name is John Finn. I'm a retired circuit court judge. I was on the bench here for 27 years, and I was part of those committees that the county exec talked about, the Justice Coalition, Space and Prop. I worked with those committees and others to deal with the jail and courthouse problem. So that I'm going to give you just a brief history. I'll be as brief as I can. This started years ago. There were consultants, there were architects. What we came up with, the first plan, was, I think, the best plan, and that was building a courthouse across the street next to the annex, joined to the annex by a secure area, and a 2-story building that would deal with 4 courtrooms on a second floor, and the clerk of courts on the first floor, and maybe the family court commission. That would require other court-related offices, such as the district attorney, to move over to the annex, and then those persons who were displaced by that movement would come back over here to a renovated second floor in this building. And I thought that would work. You'd be building one building. Then the discussion came, maybe we should do the jail at the same time, because the jail is not good. We had that discussion. What the problem became with the jail was the constant worry about the escalating daily population. And that was brought about by the fact that it was happening, and projections for the future by architects and by consultants. I remember one consultant telling us that he thought by the year 2020, next year, we were going to have an average daily population of 300. And everybody looked and said, well, how'd you figure that out? Well, we just looked at the increase from year to year, and that's what we came up with. So we get the jail in there, and then there's discussion about, well, maybe we should have room for an additional jail later on, because this is just going to keep going until eventually the entire county's in jail. So fortunately, several things happened. The first was, at or about this time, we had a justice programs person by the name of Kathy King. She and I sat down and tried to figure out some kind of programs to keep people out of jail. That was the advent of the Day Report Center, the pretrial supervision and post-trial supervision on OWI cases to keep people out of jail. That was starting to work, and we were able to keep the numbers pretty much even for quite a while. When I left in 2015, July of 2015, my recollection is the average daily population was 110, 120, or 130. That included the ship-outs. That was the entire ballgame. So first thing that happened was the programs. Second thing that happens is the winds start changing from Madison on what we should be doing with people who violate the law. And the discussion became, let's stop incarcerating and let's try and figure out something else to do. The third thing that happened was advances in technology. We started with an ankle bracelet program that you had to have a landline to use. And so very few people were having landlines and couldn't get on home detention. So now we've got GPS. We've got situations where many times you don't really need the 4 walls of the jail. So those 3 things happened. And remember I said the average daily population was 110, 120, or 130? I checked with Judge Flugar last week. It's 80 right now, 80. So that's a 33% drop in the average daily population. So I think that fear of jail population going beyond control is no longer a legitimate fear. So just going down the resolution talks about a reduction of 10 to 20% and prohibitive costs of being downtown. I don't know how that can be. We don't have numbers, so you have to use your experience. First plan, and this is if you do the swap with the annex. First plan, everybody moves. You go out to this land out off Pulaski Road. You've got no buildings, you've got no roads into the jail. So you've got building cost. If you move everybody, you're getting new quarters for everybody. That's one option. The other option is stay here, use that original plan, move people over, the courts, build a 2-story courthouse, not a 3-story. What happened with that plan is somebody put another story on there and started putting non-court personnel on the 2nd floor. You don't need that. 2 stories will make it. Use the annex for the court-related people. Anybody that gets displaced by that, renovate this area here in the courts. That'll work. The other concern talks about parking. I've never had a parking problem here. I know an attorney, he's no longer with us, he used to park in front of the building every day. Every day he found a parking space in front of the building. That's a misnomer. There's no problem parking. The population center, or the geographical center of the county, that's been there for 150 years, 175 years. That hasn't changed. The population center, I don't think that's as important as the fact that the courthouse ought to be in the center, the civic center of the city, the heart of the city. So I ask you to not to approve the resolution for those reasons. I think we can do it. I think you can do it with the original plan. You already own the property over there, and so that's what it was for. That Weber Tackle building was built, was purchased by the county with the idea of expanding in that direction. So thank you for listening to me.
Michael Mara?
Michael Mara, 1809 Clark Street, Stevens Point, Wisconsin. Right now, you're looking at a series of studies as to how you're going to develop your whole jail system. A lot of people are talking about raw cost, and that's true. But you have a real tough deal because there are things that can't be monetized that are also important. The population in the center of the city has a large population of people who don't have access to a car. And you say, well, you got a bus going out there. Well, it means it's going to be, a bus comes every hour. Get on a bus, get there, you wait maybe an hour. You get your business done, and you get back, and if you're lucky, your matter is done before 5:30. And if you're not, how are you going to get home? You don't have any sidewalks going out there, and you're going to have to provide some way for those guys to get home. Is the county committed that they are going to maintain all those sidewalks all winter long for people to walk to and from the jail? If they don't, or not from the courthouse, I'm sorry, it's a tough deal. Right now, there is a reasonable way for people to get to use the courthouse services. If you go out there, there won't be as reasonable a place. And you're here to serve all the people in the county. People who live in Amherst or Almond or where else in the county, they're already used to using a car to get someplace. But here we have a large population that is pedestrian bound. That's why they're living here. And figure out a way to take care of their needs as well as what may or may not be the cheapest. I tend to agree with Judge Finn that I can't see building multiple buildings is going to be lots less cheaper than rehabbing this floor and building one building. Thank you.
Carol Malewski?
Carol Malewski, 2125 Clark Street. I'm going to try to go through my notes and eliminate some things, but I just want to make a comment on people not attending meetings. I talked to dozens of people. I basically found out about this meeting on Friday afternoon, and since then I have talked to multiple people, and the people that I talked to, by far the majority of them, were for the downtown site. But the other thing that I heard was that they thought this whole idea of where the courthouse was going to be had been settled because there was a Portage County board vote on it that said it was going to be located downtown. I think the other problem is, as far as just communication that Chris Holman mentioned, newspapers were very different just recently, as well as the Gazette. And the Gazette's been sold, the Journal has been sold, and you don't have the same interaction with letters to the editor that you used to have. Everybody looked at those, and read those. A lot of people are in that transition point from going from paper information to electronic. A lot of people do not want to go on Facebook because of all the issues with Facebook that have come up in this recent past, and they don't want to be on Facebook, and they're getting off Facebook. I guess the point is to get everybody to go on the city and the county website, and for some that's just a very difficult thing to do. And a lot of those people that have a hard time looking things up like that are voters in our community. They're older people, and they may well be somebody that's 45, 50 and older, because we didn't have those computer classes. So we're not as tech savvy as a lot of people. The other thing I wanted to mention was that our downtown is really a very viable place. And I think the reason it has maintained that viability, as opposed to a lot of other small cities that you see our size, is because the civic buildings are downtown. They are destination points. So people that come to the courthouse and people that come to City Hall, they come here for business, and they do other things while they're downtown. They may go to the post office, they may go to the library, which was going to be sited outside of the downtown at one time, but the county saw that this was a good place, and the city, to keep it in the downtown area so that there's a walkable place, and there is the essence of a small town in our downtown. And because of that synergy between the city and the county and the small businesses that are downtown, including the lawyers that somebody said, well, they'll have to move out because oftentimes they follow courthouse. But those lawyers are also small businessmen, and they oftentimes have a tough job maintaining that business. So the businesses downtown also were required now for decades to adhere to the guidelines of the Historic Preservation Design Review Committee. And they have invested a lot of money in their buildings downtown to make it a viable place and a place that people want to walk in. The city has rejuvenated the square, which on Saturdays is an amazing place now. And so we've
Please get to your point. Your
I'm
3
sorry.
minutes are up.
Okay, all right. So what I'm saying is, destination places, a courthouse is a destination place. It should be downtown because it keeps people down here. It keeps business down here. It keeps money down here. It keeps the downtown vital. It is the center, the core. The university, too, is within walking distance. Midstate is within walking distance. They should stay downtown. And I thought the county board was of that mind. Thank you.
Eric Olson?
He was on deck.
Paying attention. So I'm glad to see a lot of people coming here to talk. I agree with the most recent speaker that this actually did kind of come out of nowhere, that there was a lot of talk about staying downtown, then suddenly the city says let's swap, and now according to this resolution it's sort of like, yep, let's do that. 25 acres on the edge of the city, let's go for that. You shouldn't be too surprised that there's a lot of people who want to talk about this, because people show up to protect valuable public investments that are important to them. And the county's investment right now in downtown Stevens Point is both valuable and important. Now, a friend recommended that if I come here and talk, that I don't just complain, but instead offer some suggestions. So here's my advice. Take a fraction of the money you have allocated, and to answer the question, I think the previous resolution authorized $600,000, so take a fraction of that and have it, use it to contract a freelance reporter and an accountant. Task them with going out, and this is what bugs me. We operate as though this is the only county facing these questions. We're not. There's 72 counties in the state. There's hundreds of counties in the nation. They're all addressing these same questions, but we're operating in a bubble. So hire an accountant, short-term, on a contract, and a journalist, and ask them to go to 12 or 15 counties that have recently already done this in the last 1, 2, 10 years. Ask them to go talk to people or actually listen to people. Ask them to go listen to the staff in those counties. Ask them to go listen to the sheriff, to the judges. Some of these counties have chosen to keep everything downtown. They've decided that is a worthwhile investment, and they've actually made that. Some of them have decided, well, we're gonna put the jail and the sheriff on the edge of town, but we're gonna keep everything else in the city. I can find one county that's decided to pluck it all up and move it out to the edge, and that's Green Lake County. Green Lake County, they moved it to the edge. It's about a 5-minute drive from downtown Green Lake to the edge of that place. It's about a 2-mile trip. So go to these communities and find out what's going on. Find out what their experience has been. The reason why you need an accountant is you have to figure out what those costs really were. You're hearing from consultants, and it's been mentioned a couple of times, consultants who are paid by the foot. So guess what? They're going to push you in a certain direction. Find out after the fact what these expenses have look like. So they're going to talk to these folks or listen to them. Listen to, also, based on what we just heard, listen to some business people downtown. Find out how these things have changed in places where they've pulled things out of downtown and compare it to places where they've kept things in the city. Ask them to summarize it shortly, 1 page or 2 pages for each community, and share it amongst yourself, share it online, share it with the community. We are not in a bubble. We shouldn't be operating in a bubble. Then we can proceed, I think, with some wisdom, some insights from other communities and how they've handled pretty much the exact same challenges we face. I have to be honest, I don't think you're going to do this. I think there's some people on this board who now see something in their sights that they've wanted for a long time. And so I'm not going to be surprised if this resolution passes, but you're kicking sand in the face of a lot of people who are surprised that it's up before you today. Thanks.
Tom Enright?
On the next.
Who's the next one?
Not on this.
Oh, you're right. Sorry about that, Tom. Will Seitz?
Will Stites, 425 Buchholz Avenue, Stevens Point. I believe that the courthouse and the county services should remain downtown. It may make sense for the sheriff's department to move out near the interstate highway, but the rest of the county services, the office-based stuff, should stay downtown. And thanks, Judge Finn, for making the excellent points you did. I found them very persuasive. Also, removing the county workers from downtown Stevens Point would set back the business vitality here by taking a lot of daytime workers out of the city, and that would damage the long-term economic prospects for the city. Okay, impoverishing Stevens Point would create problems in the future for the county, who has to pick up the slack when people can't make a decent living. Prosperous Stevens Point is indispensable for the quality of life in the county as a whole. Also, a point that may be forgotten is that moving the county operations out to the edge of the city is urban sprawl. That increases traffic congestion and it increases our carbon footprint. That's the wrong thing to do now that the destructive effects of climate disruption are becoming more obvious every day. We need to stop thinking about carbon footprint as someone else's problem. We need to take responsibility and make this an important part of our decisions. Thank you.
Tom Brown?
Evening, everybody. Tom Brown, 6th Avenue in Stevens Point. I have some prepared remarks and a couple comments based on the executive's presentation. So, I've been a resident here for 40 years or so, and I'm pretty disheartened, to say the least, about the fact that the county is even considering a greenfield site for all of their facilities. There might be some budgetary reasons for that, cheaper to build, et cetera, but it's really kind of a fatally flawed concept in my mind, and it has some both short and long-term effects that are quite negative on the vibrancy of our community and our economy. And it, as Will mentioned, it flies in the face of trying to have a more sustainable future here. So it's not the most forward-thinking planning, and there's no thought to what happens to this building if a greenfield site happens. I've, previous presentations like, oh, well, we'll find some use for it maybe. Stevens Point's going to get stuck with a lot of useless real estate, and that will be the county's fault, and I resent it as a city resident. A lot of businesses, as has been mentioned, are co-located with the county facilities, and all of the other businesses downtown depend on those employees for their livelihood. According to the last census, 38% of the county population was city, and 31% of the last county tax levy was city. So there's some significant numbers there, and a deteriorating financially unhealthy downtown will adversely affect county revenues for years to come. I'd like to remind the 9 county supervisors who represent districts in the city that they have 2 roles. One is to represent the interests of city residents to the county, and then also their role of looking out for the broad interests of the entire county and not just the city. But I would hope that those other supervisors who represent the smaller towns and rural areas also see the merits in maintaining a healthy Stevens Point at the heart of their county. I would like to address the county executive's doors that he showed us. Well, there's the door we can walk through and stay downtown, or the door we can walk through that goes to the greenfield site, and the door that sort of splits the difference a little here, a little there. It's good to point those doors out. But I also heard a lot about the presentation of, oh, we're already through that greenfield door, and we can move the pieces of the puzzle, but we're already through that door. And I, frankly, would hope we would never open that door for all of the county facilities. I think there might be merit in discussing some of the county facilities, but certainly not the offices. And Stevens Point is the heart of Portage County. And if you don't have a healthy heart, you don't have a healthy county. So thank you very much, and I hope you vote down this resolution or seriously amend it.
Eric Sheets.
Good evening. My name is Attorney Eric Sheets. I'm a local attorney. I live at 206 Cedar Street West in Stevens Point. I also have an office right here in the area on Church Street. To begin, I'd like to say that I echo the comments made by Judge Finn. I think he gave a good history, and I support the first idea. I still think that renovating right in this area, right across from this courthouse, is the best idea. I sat in these meetings when there were discussions about building a new courthouse in, I believe it was 2014 and 2015. I also thought this issue had been put to rest and was surprised to learn it had come back up. A lot of what we had discussed, and there were three different areas that were discussed. One was right here. One was out by Crossroad Commons. I think another one by West River Drive, if I'm not mistaken. Each of those were discussed. The other 2 areas would have been cheaper. Discussing the purpose of why this courthouse should remain downtown is what eliminated those other ideas. That's why everyone thought they were off the table. What is the purpose? We serve our community. Our community is best served by this being downtown. We can quote the geography and the population studies. The indigent people, the people that are less able to travel and maybe have lesser financial means, are able to access the courthouse that is here to serve them by keeping it in this community. Beyond that, the effect it will have on the local community. We just lost Shopco. Century just moved. There is a large portion of this downtown area reliant on the people that are in this courthouse and the people that come and go from this courthouse. Crossroads Commons is doing fine. We need to maintain this here, both as a community center and as a part of it, both in servicing them and to not drain more from the community. Additionally, I would like to note there's all this talk of it being cost prohibitive to build here. I think a lot of the building we're asking for is maybe idealistic, and that we want it's all new structure out in this other area. We have a lot here. We have this courthouse. It can be reutilized in better ways. If we want a fourth branch, maybe the DA or the clerk of courts moves down one floor and somebody moves to the annex. There is room available. We have not only this building, we have the annex, we have the location at 1039 Ellis Street. That's over 58,000 square feet that we own. There is a lot that can be done right here. There is, I think, talk of a Huber Center if they were to use this new facility. Why not build a Huber Center here and use this just for the maximum security prisoners? They're low risk. They always return. That is a very viable means to save money, along with the no cash bail or electronic home monitoring and the other technologies we have. I think a lot of what we're asking for is ideal in an area that is absolutely not ideal. I think we can maximize the structures we have here much better than we are. And I'll be brief. I think as a community and the leaders, we need to work harder and be more creative to utilize the downtown buildings and space we have available and address the issues in a much more cost-effective way to better serve the public as we are supposed to do. Thank you for your time.
Liz McDonald?
I'm here this evening to voice my objection to the county courts and offices being moved out to the east side of Stevens Point. One of the main reasons I am objecting to this is that I feel there's been insufficient public input. And if anybody doubts that, just look at the crowd that showed up tonight. Because the word finally got out, hey, if something's going on, we better get down there and speak up. And so people are here. There was a meeting held on March 28th that I did not hear about, but I then proceeded to watch the video taping of it on the computer. And at that meeting, there was vigorous opposition to this whole plan of moving the offices out to the east side of Stevens Point. If you did not attend that meeting or if you didn't see the tape of it, please do watch it. I think it will cover a lot of the issues that people are talking about tonight. A lot of the comments that have been made really cover things that I wanted to say, and I appreciate what Judge Finn and the other folks have said about this whole plan and the alternatives that are available. One of the things I wanted to maybe stress a little bit more is that the idea of urban sprawl and the fact that putting these offices out on the east side is going to heavily increase the traffic on Highway 10, which is already a terrible corridor to try to get anywhere. And I think you all know that if you drive out that way. The other thing that has been touched on a little bit, but is that it's important to have the offices downtown for access by the public and also by the law offices. I would hate to see them move out of town to be closer to the courthouse. At this point, I think it's premature to proceed with a plan where there's no firm buy-in on the part of a building swap. So I would urge you to vote no on this resolution. Thank you.
John Gardner?
Thank you for your time. I'm John Gardner. I'm glad to see that somebody was asking about transportation to the site. I think that if you were to plot how long it would take somebody who's not on the circular route that goes directly out to the proposed courthouse site, you would find it would take them hours because they'd have to take a bus to the downtown first, wait for a transfer, then go out to the east side, then take that same bus back downtown, transfer, and go back to their home. So I would encourage you to actually plot out some times from different places of the city to see what the real transportation time and cost would be. But what I'm here to say to you is that it is in your best interest to locate next to City Hall. Decisions made more than 50 years ago by earlier county board and city council members are just as true today as they were then. Sharing of government facilities is in the interest of the public and of better government. Earlier county studies that this board made revealed that there'd be a $2 million savings if the sheriff and the police department were located next to each other. Those savings accrued because of shared evidence storage, interview rooms, breaks, lunch rooms, showers, meeting rooms, and more. And more importantly, locating next to each other resulted in better law enforcement because they would share information through casual contact and exchange of ideas. Locating City Hall and county governments next to each other will result in similar cost savings and better government. Face-to-face contact is important to break down the barriers that exist between offices and between governments. Innovations derive from the interaction of individuals. Isolation, by locating out at the edge of town and away from City Hall, would stifle that kind of innovation. Duplication of facilities also costs extra money. We're in a room here where it's shared with the city council and a judge. It's an example of how the system has worked in the past. It's in the interest of good government of the city and the county to be located next to each other. Thank you.
Joe Sizer.
Good evening. I support the things that, the proposal that Judge Finn made, and I think that he really had a overall view of what could happen. That seems like a way that you should proceed. But and other things that have been said tonight include all the economic issues of having a second downtown services somewhere else. But I'd like to focus my extra comments on the environmental issues and the carbon footprint that Will Stites mentioned of moving out there. So my main concern with this county project and many myriad projects in the United States as a whole is the waste of land and the waste of habitat for plants and animals. This idea that that you all spoke about, and the executive especially, oh great, you could really sprawl out there. You can make 2-story buildings, and you need another one? You have room. You could put so much of that 20 to 25 acres in land, in buildings and in parking lots. Great, there's just so much room. Well, I challenge you to do the more environmental thing. And it's harder, but that is to stay downtown, work with the spaces that are already developed. You might have to do tear downs. You might have to change the buildings to make them more appropriate. And you're probably right that it might not even be cheaper to do that, at least for the construction costs. And tearing down stuff costs a lot of money too. But this idea that you could just build out there really is counter to what's needed for natural corridors, for migration of insects, for places for plants and animals to live. We're going through extinctions. We have, and it's just a quick example, the shorebirds. There are pictures of shorebirds. We don't really care about these birds. It's gulls. We have gulls. We don't really care about gulls. But there's been pictures of how many gulls we have now versus 80, 100 years ago. The numbers are drastically reduced. There's just not as many of those birds. That's not even to mention species going extinct, which is happening. So this is something that it's not their problem. This is our problem here. Quickly, in another city where I resided for the last 3 months, I saw land wasted in really beautiful areas. This was land that was in basically unused parking lots, cement, impervious surfaces. So directing rain of water that should be going into the ground, becoming around here, it would be becoming groundwater. We're having flooding issues. There's flooding issues out there. So these are all things that we need to consider. So specifically, city, county, we need to review some of our zoning codes too. Maybe we need to look at impervious surfaces. Maybe we have to make some different rules about parking. These are all things that I even if we don't go out there, I think that the county should address some of these issues in the city for their building projects. I thank you, and I hope you will stick to the city.
Mary McComb?
The last several years have seen infill development and focus on strengthening the heart of the city, which I will argue is also the heart of the county. I've been involved as a downtown business owner for 11 years and also as a city council member for 4 years. And I'm very proud of those efforts. We've got new housing coming downtown. We have facilities such as Create Portage County. I've heard rumors about the Fox Theater. I know Shopko's a setback, but things happen. This proposal to move county facilities out to the east side totally counters all those efforts that so many people have worked on and are still working on. A new facility out east might be near a population center, but those from the west side of the county would have to travel all the way through the city to reach the county offices. The facility would be set among a more prosperous area of Stevens Point and the county. So the travel burdens, as many people have mentioned, would be borne by the less privileged who tend to live in the central part of the city. It would have negative effects on downtown business. If I were still selling candy, I would be worried. It will also be inefficient for city and county cooperation and the people who might have business with both the city and the county. It seems premature to design facilities before a decision has been made about a site. And I want to thank Judge Finn for reminding us of the plan that has already been developed to keep county facilities downtown. Thank you.
McKaylee Johnson?
Hi, my name is McKaylee Johnson. I live at 1559 Church Street, right across the street. Proudly the youngest citizen to speak out today. I'd like to echo what other people have said today, especially Judge Finn. And unlike one of the previous speakers, I have not lived in the city for 40 years. I've lived in the city for 5 years. I came here for the university. And I have just loved how accessible everything is. I can bike anywhere I need to be, campus, downtown. This location is great. I urge you all to consider the previous plan and not move out to Consumer Commons, Crossroad Commons. That's a term I might have coined. I really love this location. We have numerous parking lots we could make into parking garages if parking was an issue, which it's not. People park right in front of my house for 2 hours. That's totally fine. This neighborhood is perfect for walking. People in this neighborhood who work here, perfect location. I'd like to discourage moving the courthouse or any other county buildings to Consumer Commons. I think it's going to be more difficult for people to access it via bus. I know that there are bus routes and it could be easy to put a stop on there, but that doesn't take into account the time it would take to plan out a bus ride to get out there. I mean, even for shopping out there, if I wanted to shop at any of those stores, which I don't, I'd like to shop downtown at local stores, local businesses. Even if I wanted to get out there, it's difficult to walk, it's difficult to take the bus, and it's even inconvenient to ride my bike. I am lucky enough to own a car, but a lot of students I know are not. And it's so much easier for students to get here from campus, who live on campus. We have lots of them. It's easier for them to get here, and for other low-income individuals who tend to live in the city and not, out in the country. So I'd like to tell you that I do not support moving this, and I hope that you consider further investigation of expanding downtown. Thank you.
Carlene Ferrante?
Hi. I want to thank you for listening, but I also want to thank you for the wonderful testimony that you provided. I'm not as informed, I think, as some of my other speakers here. But what I wanted to focus in on is people who don't have cars. There are a lot of people who don't have cars, or their cars aren't reliable. And those people need to be able to use the courthouse. If they have to depend on the bus, I don't know if you've ever done that. For a portion of my life, I did depend on a bus. And it is very difficult. It takes a big chunk of your life. And what do you do when you're stuck someplace and the buses have stopped running? Unless we are going to go to a high-quality transit system where if I can get on a train that will come once every half hour and take me out there and continue until midnight, that is great. That would work. Then we can do it. Although we still have to think about urban sprawl and our carbon footprint and the cost of duplication of services, we'd have to think about those things. But in particular, I want you to think about inmates. Inmates need to be with their families. They need to be able to get to their jobs. And they need, people need to be able to visit them. And this is going to be much, much harder if we move everything out of the city. So please think about the people who don't have cars and who would be depending on public transportation. I think we can strengthen the rehabilitation process if we can make it easier for people to be connected, stay connected with their families and their jobs and whatever it is that really connects them with the community. Thanks very much. I want to thank Judge Finn also.
Richard Ruppel.
Richard Ruppel, 1972 Church Street. Almost everything's been said that I could possibly offer you at this point. I'd like to thank again Judge Finn, who's given us some background on all of this, and all of the speakers who pretty much said what I wanted to say. But I live downtown for a purpose. I can walk here. I did today. I walked to work for 34 years in this town, or took my bicycle. That's why I live downtown and don't live out somewhere around Consumer Commons or whatever was just rechristened. Right? I think that I watched this town transform itself over the last 30 years. It seems to be moving more towards an art destination, if you will, downtown today and so on. But they're striving to maintain the vitality of this town and moving the courthouse and other county buildings out to a new campus several miles from town doesn't seem to be helpful towards that cause. I would imagine it would injure the businesses, as has been pointed out downtown. There are transportation issues. So, I mean, I will simply say I urge you to keep the courthouse and the county buildings downtown. I can't believe building a brand new campus out there, be it over 2 years or 10 years or 20 years, can be cheaper. Thank you for your time.
That concludes our public. Now, for any of the county supervisors, Supervisor Dodge.
I appreciate all the comments that the public has made this evening. I guess I find them a little misplaced because we're down the road from an offer made by the city of Stevens Point. And I guess I never saw any published agenda where that was on for discussion and action. My understanding is it was done in closed session, which of course then would offer no opportunity for the public. So I agree that it's nice that you've all come to speak to us at this point, but I guess I was looking for the mayor to be here this evening to tell us how this evolved from the city's perspective. Since the mayor is not, and I don't see Mike Ostrowski, but the president of the city council is here, and I would assume that she had some part in that discussion. So I'd appreciate it, Melissa, if you would give us some of the information that led to this.
Supervisor Johnson, if you care to respond.
Certainly. So as with the long saga with where to put the courthouse,
how to do the courthouse and how big it should be. There's been a long saga about City Hall as well and the city's space needs. For a number, or during my first term, I believe it was, we looked at this building and what it would take to renovate the city side and our space needs. Shortly after that, we realized that we did an analysis. We looked at moving to where the police department is now, the old Mid-State building. We realized that the police department really could utilize that space almost in its entirety, which it is doing now, except for one small area. So that left the city looking at where do we look. We looked at the Lullaby site. We realized that that had far greater commercial potential. We looked at the library, frankly, and said, we do own it. The city does own it. And we realized that, the library will need to stay downtown. Then we bought a parcel of land just on the other side of our kitty corner from the ADRC, from the Lincoln Center. And we even looked at conceptual drawings as to what that would look like. And at that time, that is when we got the bids in on Edgewater. And those bids came in at almost 4.5 times the amount that we had allocated, and we realized that the city needed to focus on Edgewater and some solutions to that. So that kind of brought us back to the drawing board. Yes, there were a number of discussions in closed session about utilizing space out at East Park. And how we might use it for a number of things. There were a number of options put forward, several developments that were turned away because they weren't suitable for the city. The amount of incentive was too much. The type of business just wasn't appropriate for the city and how we wanted to grow. So again, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about closed session. It did come forward as a concept of a swap. What would this look like? And from there, that discussion, we tasked staff, which was primarily Michael Ostrowski in Community Development, and of course the mayor, to have a conversation, I believe, with Chair Haga and County Executive and other people. And that's where we are. The city has not had any other discussions beyond that public meeting that was in March, the joint meeting. We have not had any other meetings internally as council since that time. So sorry for the long story, but it's a long story.
That's what I wanted.
Yeah, thank you.
Supervisor Bob Gifford.
Yeah, thank you. I came here tonight prepared to vote against the resolution. I'll tell you why. Even though it's labeled conceptual, only, I'm disagreeing on the fundamental concepts involved in it. Okay, actually, Eric Olson is the one that really called attention to me, focused my attention on the aspect of urban sprawl, when he called it the exurbia site. And to go back a decade ago, Stevens Point went through this whole big visionary session, similar to what our county exec and I went through with the future regions. It was called the Eco-Municipality Project, and the mayor at that time declared Stevens Point is going to be an eco-municipality. Well, I never thought his heart was in it, and the whole purchase of that whole big giant chunk of land on the east side was basically under the last years of his term. The initial design concept that I see here is not based on the natural step ideas of eco-municipality and sustainability, because in that system of thinking, you do not constantly encroach upon your green space, your natural environment. You want to preserve your natural environment. And in that framework, which is widely used in Scandinavian countries, instead you take the built environment that you already have and you constantly upgrade and repurpose that rather than finding new green space to encroach on. So people have used the word tonight of urban sprawl, And, you know, this is not a trivial point. I mean, I'm not just being a snowflake here, right? It's critical for the United States that we get off of this concept of constant growth on a finite base of resources. At some point, very soon, we're going to run short on these resources. So we should be thinking sustainability, not because it's, you know, cool and liberal and snowflakey, but because it's going to be a matter of survival, as Joe Sizer pointed out, survival of all of life, you know. So that's my objection to this. Hopefully we can overcome it.
I'd like to see the definition of urban sprawl, but I know that, is that 700 and some acres that's out there that's designated for future, Supervisor Johnson?
You're asking me to recall things in my memory. We have options on much of that.
In the long-range plan of it, or though it's
in a land use plan, yes.
Yes, it's in a land use plan.
And you'll find it similarly stated in a comprehensive plan. But as in all good plans, sometimes they change.
Okay. Supervisor Splinter.
I'll keep this brief, but in the town of Hull, where I have over 3,000 people that I represent, we have a trailer park that probably has some of the poorest people in the county. I go through that quite a bit, and I look at it, and some people are living in homes that are less than $3,000 value. And they all seem to find their way to Walmart, Shopko, Kohl's, Lowe's, downtown, anywhere when they want to. So my constituents actually would be closer to the services by being in the green space. Also, we're not voting as a final to go out there. All we're doing right now is Chris gave us a 50,000-foot view of what's possible. All we're doing tonight is voting to bring that down to maybe 25,000-foot view so that we can see a little more detail. If you look out that window, you'll see a jail, which it was short-sighted. They built it as cheap as they could, and the day it opened, it was obsolete. And if you go over through that jail and take a good tour like we got from the sheriff, it's pathetic what planning went into that. I think as a county board for Portage County, we owe our taxpayers due diligence to come up with a plan that's not 20 years or 30 years or 50 years, but a 100-year plan. All of us will be gone by then, but we will leave our great-grandchildren a lot better county, and something that they'll be proud that we put some thought into. Thank you.
Supervisor James Gifford.
Well, given the fact that I am the longest-serving member of the county board, I came on the board before Judge Finn was a judge, if you can believe that, and I arrived on the county board when the jail opened. And I had people say, how could you have done that to us? And I said, I wasn't here. It was built before I was on the board. And this thing comes up periodically. I don't know if it's moon cycles or something, but every so often, what are we going to do? I take a little bit of offense at some people who said, why is the county doing this? Why did you change your minds? Well, as somebody else has pointed out, it was brought to us. We didn't suddenly run around, oh, Stevens Point, do you want to give us some land so we can move? And I remember we did at one point want to move, actually we wanted to move out where the Marshfield Clinic location is, and the city, the mayor at that time, made it impossible for us to do that. The city has long resisted us going anywhere, and if you don't like what we're doing, why don't you go to one of Melissa's meetings and bring up the fact that, the city is just, if you think we're guilty, the city's just as guilty in this whole process, Mike.
It takes a community to do something wrong, and it takes a community to do something right.
That's absolutely correct. Thank you.
Supervisor Mua.
All right. So I think everyone hears what I have to say all the time. But two things that are a concern to me when I think about voting on this resolution, and I understand that this is just really looking into what's possible. But I also think, why put energy into looking at what's possible in a space where we've heard majority of the people tell us no? Also, I've been asking, we talk so much about money and how much money can be saved here and there and how much money we'll spend renovating or building new. But one thing I keep saying that I don't hear from folks is, I need to know what the impact on people will be. And I'm saying that because for majority of my career here in Stevens Point, I worked with victims. I've worked as an interpreter in these courtrooms. And so I see the things that folks have to go through, either as someone who has been through the system, has been incarcerated, or even as victims. And I want to share one story. I have victims of domestic violence and sexual assault that I've worked with who don't know how to read or write, don't speak English, may not have access to a car, who have to take time off of their jobs just so they can show up in court or to file a restraining order. And moving this out there would require them, instead of taking off an hour or two, to take off a whole day possibly, because you're talking about an hour bus ride out there to drop something off. If this is like one of the victims I worked with before, where she was actually she was actually charged with a crime for protecting herself. She then has to come back from the courthouse to the public defender's office and go back. That's a whole day's, maybe even 2 days, if you don't have proper transportation. So I really want us to think about the impact that it has on people, the additional barriers and the additional layers of oppression that this will create on folks, both for those who are incarcerated and those who also depend on our systems to protect them. Then also the impact that it has on area businesses down here in the downtown area. One thing I talk about, and I know every time I bring it up when we talk about incarceration rates and the jail facilities, is how wonderful Portage County already is doing. I do admit Portage County is doing a great job, but until tonight, we never heard about any strong decarceration plans. And like for me to be able to vote properly on anything going forward around the county jail, I need to see an equitable decarceration plan. And with that, we need to have those most impacted at the table developing these decarceration plans. Thank you.
In my role, I've tried to make sure that we can bring as many things forward. And I think Supervisor Johnson had mentioned it, that some of this stuff happens in committees, and that's where it dies. And I have tried to work hard to make sure that, like Highway, we had a presentation from them when we had all the snowstorms and stuff to bring things forward. Health and Human Services on the child welfare and some of those other things. And that is one of the things that, because we have had some discussion, I want to try and get somebody to come in here and give us a little update again to the board, so everybody else here understands about all the work that we're doing. So, Executive Holman.
Yeah. Thanks, and I apologize for stepping in. I know that I've spoken more than anybody tonight, but I'm just reflecting on everything I'm hearing from everybody, and I just want to point out that the particular resolution isn't directing everything to move out per se. It's just saying that if you want to look at any possible combination of things out there, that the resolution would have to pass so that we're authorized to actually do the work. Absent the authorization, we can't then ask the questions to say, as a hypothetical, and I don't know if people want to try to bridge the concepts either, but you could say, authorize the schematic design phase services for the Greenfield location, and also the Finn plan that everybody is in favor of, so that you could say, all right, and the reason I bring it up is because, to me, and throughout this whole conversation, it's important to throw everything on the table and see what it is. You know, as you discuss it, the pros and cons will emerge, and you have these kinds of conversations here and elsewhere, and you get input. And so there's nothing that precludes us from saying that if you want to take a look at options out there, or even a courthouse, for instance, over here, that can be done. I still think that building everything downtown is cost prohibitive, because you're talking about building vertically, and based on just the rough estimates from the architecture, looking at $130, $150 million. It's just something that it's too much. That doesn't mean you have to build everything at once either. We've been talking about the fact that there's a range of possibilities, but I just wanted to plant the seed to say that the whole point of the resolution is to authorize the next step, the walking through the door, so to speak, to say, what answers do you want to find out? And if the authorization is given, then that allows us to go back to committees and say, where do you want to go? And then that conversation then informs the next steps in terms of what we ask from the architects and everybody else. So, thanks.
Supervisor Moresi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my recommendation is that we actually refer this back to committee so they can further do their due diligence to provide these options in this resolution, so we're not voting for something that isn't inclusive. Right now, this is specifically for the Greenfield site, and
we've done a preliminary, we've done this, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but we've done this same exercise downtown, correct?
Correct, yeah.
We've done all the conceptual site development, like can it work? And looking at the downtown, that's where the costs started going through the roof, and everybody's kind of like, okay, that's not even something that you'd want to bring to the board, because it's just too much to try to capture it all into one place. I think to your point, referring back to committee, if that's an option that you want to pursue, is certainly your prerogative, but I'd also like to point out, and I've pointed out at other meetings before we got here, that it's well within your purview as a county board to amend this, strike, add, do whatever you'd like. Either path can give you the thing that you're looking for. Referring back to committee is just going to postpone it. Everybody will just be sitting on their hands for a couple weeks. If you have an idea about what you want to do now, you could propose that, and then if that were to pass, to say, look at downtown for the Finn plan, let's call it, and look at out there for just various pieces, so that you at least see what it is. You're still operating without a great degree of detail on any of these pieces. Then that can come back into the conversation and give people what they're looking for, and then that gives you a better foundation to make it the next decision or not, based on what you know then.
Well, I guess then in order to do that, I'll go with my original spiel here, and you'll have to forgive me because the ultimate was to refer it back so then we could have something cohesive and from the committee. But originally, we charged BWBR Dewberry to create a design plan to construct a new facility. And then we wanted to change the scope of services. We voted on that last week to change the scope of services so we could kind of get this conceptual plan and design out on the table. However, we never actually saw we never saw the numbers for what made downtown so cost prohibitive, so we can't actually make an educated decision on that. In regards to whereas number 4, I see that as mostly false. The city does have conceptual plans, and there's actually adequate space downtown for a separate city and county campus. I was at all 3 of the city community planning meetings, and what those plans did reveal to me with the conversations I had with other community members and city staff and the consultants was the vibe I was getting was that the jail is not really considered or really desired in this downtown equation. It was very clear that building the jail in the heart of the downtown would be seen as a mistake and unfavorable by the majority of Stevens Point citizens. But the construction of a new courthouse, AKA the Finn plan attached to the annex, would be welcome and encouraged. So I would strike 4 from whereas number 4 from this resolution. As we know, input from in regards to whereas number 6, input from the general public has been less than stellar. We all know this. When we had 22 people come to the various meetings that we had throughout the past year, and then tonight we've definitely surpassed that, and it's all been against moving the jail out there. So I don't see how in whereas number 6, that we could say that input from the county has been in favor of a government facility in the green space location. I think that is completely false. And that should be struck from the resolution as well. The green space being closer to the geographic center, I'm not sure how this actually has a bearing on anything since there's little to no infrastructure out there. I know that the city, according to Executive Holman, is going to be putting it out there anyway, but as a city and county, we barely have a budget to maintain what we already have built, let alone building a new infrastructure that's going to take care of a 25-acre campus. The owner's rep says that there'll be a this one's in regard to whereas number 8. The owner's rep says that there's a 10 to 20% savings if we build in this green space. And I agree with him. If we're going to go with low bid and not what's best for our community, then he's probably right. But I think we know what's best for our community because we live here every single day. I build for a living, so I know that it is much easier and cheaper to build in an open field rather than the heart of the city. But how is it cheaper to build a new jail and a new juvenile facility and new parking lots and new roads and run new sewer, water, electric service and a new bus route and dig some retaining ponds and an entirely new government campus that was never part of the scope of this project out there? Not to mention, we're going to remove 200 to 300. If we did this, we would remove 200 to 300 county employees from the downtown, and all the potentially private legal professionals might pull up stakes and move their offices into the proposed location. I guess how is this cheaper? How is it cheaper to, is sprawl cheaper than when infrastructure is expensive and budgets are tight? How is removing hundreds of workers from the heart of the city a cheaper proposition? While local businesses lose their clientele and Portage County employees patronize a new national chain out there where none of their dollars will stay within our community. I guess Happy Meals are cheap, but so are cheap jails like the one we have across the street, you know. I think that the lowest bid got us where we were at, 25 years ago, and since then we've been squabbling about what we're going to do. So I really do agree with Judge Finn. At one of the earlier meetings that he attended, he said, if you have to do anything, move the jail out there, but keep the government courthouses in our strong urban core. And I firmly believe that is very true. So I'm all for gathering all the facts, and that we need to know a lot more rather than just packing up and leaving town, and I know that's not anybody's intention here. But I think if we're going to do our due diligence, then we need to gather the options, like the executive said. And it's funny, we had the same plan. We need to know how much complete downtown campus will cost, and it sounds like we have those numbers, and we can start comparing them. We need to know, and that would include the jail. Option 2 would be to know how much just the courthouse attached to the annex would cost. And it would obviously have like a Sally port in there to have safe transport for dependents. We also need to know how much just a law enforcement center out in the proposed green space would cost. A new law enforcement center located in the geographic center of our county and near our 2 major highways makes perfect sense for the entire county's public safety. I support our sheriff's department, and I want them to be in the best possible position when dealing with emergencies. And then as much as I do not favor a new campus out east of town, we should at least gather these numbers to understand the numbers and the data and costs to to understand and have viable comparisons. But we have to include the costs that weigh social, environmental, and both local scale economic factors as well. As everybody's brought up, that is a huge factor when you're looking at removing a vital organ from our community. I guess if I was to summarize that, it'd be like me doing surgery on myself and trying to remove an organ and then charging myself to do that surgery and then putting it somewhere else in my body. It just doesn't quite make sense. So I think unless we can really buckle in and get all of this information that I'm requesting, I'm not going to be able to vote in favor of this. Or if Space and Properties wants to reevaluate their resolution and create something that is more inclusive of what everybody is speaking of here today, I think that might be the best course of action.
So going back, are you making a motion to make an amendment? You know, after we because if you did, I heard about 3 of them in there.
There were 3.
And I guess if you are making a motion,
I'd make a motion to strike number 4 and completely. I'd make a motion to strike number 6 completely. And then somehow, since I wasn't planning on adding things to make amendments to get a more inclusive vision on this, I would I'd make a motion to add the Finn plan, and I have 4 options.
We'll need the exact verbiage that you want in your amendment and where. If you would like some time, I'll call on you again. How is that?
That sounds great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
And I guess in any of the meetings we've talked about, one of the problems we're trying to solve is to get the jail and the courthouses together. If we built the jail anywhere else and the court separated, that road out here just got a lot bigger, and that's not what we're trying to accomplish. Those 2 need to be together. Supervisor Dodge.
Number 1, I don't believe Space and Properties is interested in having this resolution returned to the committee. Number of people, including Vinnie, have talked about the vacuum that the county leaving downtown would create. And I guess when I was asking about the discussion that City Council had before they made this proposal to the county, my assumption would be that they had made that calculation with whatever they were proposing to bring into the TIF district. So I think that discussion is probably premature. Maybe it isn't even something that the county is concerned about. That's a city issue, and they should have been addressing it a long time ago.
Supervisor Medine.
Thank you. County Executive's proposal outlined in this resolution is to build a jail southeast of Land's End behind Sherwin-Williams Paint, and then to increase the size of the jail project in order to not only move the sheriff's department, but also all county personnel from the downtown County City building, the annex, halfway house into the new building. The resolution is worded so strongly in favor to favor that site and disparage any other site. I'm disappointed there is no reference in the resolution for future use of the County City building, so it would probably be vacated and maybe abandoned. I'm also disappointed there is no reference in the resolution to determine at what stage within the process that the general cost of the building project would be made public. Hopefully, the general cost would be made public before the design progresses to the set-in-stone stage. While I'm okay with checking out an open space for the Justice Center General County Government Building, I will not support this resolution primarily because there is no reference to a stop point as soon as general costs for the project are determined. That stop point at the concept stage would allow the county board to make the same determination it did at the concept stage of the building project with the addition to the county annex. The executive says it's cost prohibitive. I say let the legislative body, us, make that call as quick as possible after having more complete set of facts. I was led to believe that the resolution passed by the county board a month ago for concept development would be sufficient to develop some general cost figures for the project. Obviously, everyone knew that all the buildings would fit in a 25-acre square parcel. So the primary reason for the concept development was to look at general parameters for cost of the project, maybe even simply based on general cost per square foot of construction. The architect ought to be able to provide that for the remainder of that $12,000 we authorized last month, and the unspent remainder of the $95,000 authorized in resolution, as you see on your page, Resolution 8-2018-2020, that was for $95,000. There should be some remaining in that for them to make that decision fairly quickly. Only after that discussion should the county authorize design development. It'd also be nice if there was a modicum of objectivity in this resolution. Most of the whereases are speculative. I am very accustomed on this county board to have all the whereases be facts, not speculative, or even in some cases a bit inflammatory. For instance, whereas number 4, it says the city has a plan for the areas and the buildings that would be vacated. Well, it's not that simple. Generally, the process for the city has been, number 1, clear the site of existing buildings since they are never specifically suitable for developers, and the site can't be marketed with unmarketable buildings standing. Secondly, the city installs adequate infrastructure and then gives the land to a developer. Finally, the city uses TIF tax monies to give back to the development about 1/3 of the construction costs of the developer. Oso's, Soik property, the land across the street from the high-rise, the former Lullaby property, all were negotiated in this format. I've not seen the city express any level of commitment to plan for managing the vacated County City building. It will never be specifically attractive for a developer since its design is for general government and not private office space. Whereas number 5, the county would, quote, would bring in revenue by renting 1039 Ellis Street, known as the former Weber Tackle building. The building is simply a modified industrial building that isn't suitable for long-term rental and will simply be a money pit if it's left standing. Whereas number 6, input from the public identifies a slight preference for the green space location. I think after tonight, we all have a better idea of public sentiment. Whereas number 8, along with whereas number 1, identify an average 15% construction cost favorable to a green space location. However, since the county already owns and occupies 1/4 of the buildings needed for the whole project, they are used for general government and support services. They can continue to be used so we don't have to build all new buildings. This can overcome the cost disadvantage relative to all new construction. And finally, whereas number 9 generally obligates me to agree with all the whereases in order to vote for this resolution. I can't do it. Certainly, as this resolution embellishes going ahead without at least a general discussion of total costs. Furthermore, the proposed site is an interesting parcel. 2 months ago, it would have been tough to access. 2 months ago, I drove down Highway R. I could not turn east on Double H. There was a sign there, and there was good reason for a sign there. There was water over the road. In order to remedy the future problems, the surface water would have to be rerouted. The water table would have to be lowered for the building to have a basement or elevator well. This parcel is at the edge of the Little Plover River watershed, where there's already a major controversy about farmers lowering water tables. I urge the rest of my colleagues on the county board to join me in voting no on this resolution based on these observations.
Supervisor Matt Chakowski.
Mr. Chair, with what's been said here tonight, I'd like to call for the vote, because if you don't like what's in the resolution, vote it down, and of course it would go back to committees and we'd start over. I think we need to call for the vote on this. A lot of stuff's been rehashed over and over and over and over and over and over. I think it's time to have the vote.
No.
Supervisor Pataki.
Just a couple of statements, Mr. Chairman. Number one, I think I know the sheriff is here today, and I think a number of 80 inmates was thrown out, and I don't think that is correct. Sheriff, any?
Today the population was 107. That's with Hubers, that's with home detention. We have to count all those beds. So we had 48 in custody here, 35 shipped out, 20 on home monitoring.
It fluctuates quite a bit, but I think the numbers that Judge Finn had used before, the 110, 120, 130, I don't know if we've seen 130, but it's possible, but it's pretty close to the same as it was probably back then.
Our population for the last month and a half has been lower, a lot lower, I will say that, but the average population for last year was 138.
So it hasn't changed much in a number of years. But Supervisor Pataki still has the floor.
We've been building a jail for the last 20 years, okay? And the cost of a jail right now is, I think 20 years ago was like $37 million. Today it's probably double, if not more than that. If we would have built that jail 10 years ago, Wood County, when Waupaca County built their jail, people laughed and said, "Why did you build such a big jail?" And I don't know if the sheriff had any answers to that. However, right now they are getting our prisoners, they are getting prisoners from Wood County, and they are laughing all the way to the bank because they built that jail. When we build a jail, I would think that it'd be wise. And I spoke with the sheriff from Wood County, and I spoke with the sheriff from Marathon County, and they would send their prisoners to our jail. So I hear a lot of people say, "Well, we're not in a business to make money in a jail." Well, to me, that sounds kind of stupid, right? If we can bring in $3 million a year, plus the savings that we would make, we've been paying over $500,000 a year to Waupaca County, and I think we're sending them to Lincoln County. I know we still are.
We go to Lincoln or Marquette County on overflow.
And Waupaca County is going there, I believe, have our numbers gone down from Waupaca, Sheriff? Are they bringing more of their own prisoners in?
We have a contract for 35 beds in Waupaca County, and they don't have any room anymore, so that's why we have overflow going to other agencies.
That's what's going to continue happening. The juvenile center, there are juvenile centers throughout the state who are shutting down. Portage County is kind of geographically in the middle of the state, and if we build a juvenile center, we're going to bring people in from other counties into our juvenile center. So, are we in this to making money? Hey, don't kick a dead dog in the butt, right? Anyway, that's all I have to say.
Supervisor Barry Jakowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've referred tonight, or several people have referred tonight to the amount of people that have come here to speak against moving out of town, because we shouldn't move out of town because it's going to be harder for certain people to get to the courthouse. Many of my constituents this evening, and contrary to everybody's belief here, we don't all out in the town of Belmont and Lanark and Almond drive Cadillacs. They're not here this evening because they may be older and they may be feeble and they have a hard time navigating downtown traffic. They have a hard time navigating navigating roundabouts that they're not used to. So I think when we talk about access to a courthouse, we do have to think about everybody in the county, not just the 5-block area or the 10-block area around this facility. So I think when we talk about accessibility to a county facility, we have to think about the outlying areas of the county as well. Again, we don't all drive Cadillacs that are a year and a half old, that are all still under warranty. We drive vehicles that are not so reliable, and we have a hard time getting maybe into downtown. So when we talk about accessibility, we have to worry about the whole county. And not that we don't all appreciate everybody who came here this evening to speak, and we all certainly appreciate former Judge Finn's opinion as to what it should be. But again, we have to remember that we are voting as a whole county, not just the city of Stevens Point. Thank you.
Supervisor James Gifford.
Well, Matt didn't make it in the form of a motion, but I will. I move we close debate.
I'll second it.
I've had my hand up.
Call for the vote.
It's called to the chair. I'm going to give these last two ladies a chance here. Supervisor Neville.
I thought when this came up to begin with, the green space as a possibility, that we were asking the wrong question about whether it's more expensive to build here or build there. I thought the question was, do we want to keep the county buildings in the downtown or move them out of downtown? And in that first meeting where the public had input, I thought we were going to learn more about what was going on, and very little was said about what the plan was, and then there was time for discussion. But one of the things that was said in there was that Mr. Ostrowski said it would facilitate urban sprawl, and he saw that as a problem. He didn't, he recognized that as a problem, which has been brought up tonight. So I thought initially the question is, do we want it downtown or not? And I still think that's the question, more than the individual cost of here or the cost somewhere else. I also thought that the city, when they offered us this piece of land to go to, they didn't offer us the prime piece, which would have been on HH, because that was set aside to sell to somebody. Well, I checked on that, and the deadlines with the group that was supposed to buy it have not been met, so that could be thrown out. They could make a better offer. They could offer that piece on HH. I a little bit have had the feeling that maybe the city didn't want us to stay. They wanted us to go, but they weren't giving us the prime place to go. But if this resolution passes, I don't know what happens. And I'm very uncomfortable because I don't think cost is a thing. And when the resolution says that the initial estimates for the government project would be cost prohibitive, I can't vote yes for that because I don't think they're cost prohibitive. They might be more than some other cost. And the meetings that I attended for input definitely did not show a preference from what I heard for the green space location. And in the fiscal note, it says this resolution to endorse the green space location. This really sounds to me that if this specific resolution passes, we're pushing to that, it's pushing it that direction with more money. And I don't know that that's what people want. I think this resolution should not pass. And I don't think a whipped together quickly resolution should pass. I think whatever we do, we need to think about. Thank you. And I would vote no on this.
This wasn't quickly put together. It's gone through 2 committees, so, but,
No, I'm sorry, the quickly put together was if one was created, a change to this was created tonight. Like Mr. Moresi, if he created, cut some things out and we voted, so that's what I'm saying.
yeah,
That's too quick.
yeah, no. Yes, and Melissa had her hand up. This is the last comment we're going to take, and then I'm going to call.
And I still have my amendments to take care of.
I think that if,
I'll
regardless,
make it very quick.
if there's, we're going to, if it passes, it goes through. If it fails, your amendment won't make it either, so.
So you have to let me withdraw them then.
He doesn't have a motion to second. He never made it, so. Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you. A couple of things. I wouldn't mind calling the vote and getting out of here because I'm freezing. I feel like it's going to snow on me at any moment. So the city's taken a lot of finger pointing here, and I'm going to defend the city a little bit here and not accuse the county of anything. I think that that's really a stupid way to approach this. I will say that the discussion in closed session about the potential of a swap was not unanimous. So I don't want anyone thinking that there's this monolith of the city that is not wanting the county downtown. That is not the case. I think it was seen as an option maybe to prompt something, because we have been muddling in this for, well, when I was a size 7, that's when all of this started. I'm not a size 7 anymore. So if I could go back, I'd love that. So it's nobody's fault and everybody's fault, as I said to Supervisor Jim Gifford. But, so let's not point the fingers. I appreciate all the work that Space and Properties put into this. I've known Jeannie a long time, and she is a dedicated woman determined to get an outcome. There's no question about that. However, I think one of the issues is that it gets to Supervisor Moa's comment, and even what I said about decarceration, is this should almost be a joint sort of effort, Space and Properties, along with a committee, a short-term committee, ad hoc, whatever, to develop a decarceration plan and understand what that means, because part of this discussion is about footprint. In the footprint, if you go back to those renderings that Chris had up on the screen, or Executive Woman, I'm sorry, that was a huge footprint for a jail. Law enforcement, or the law enforcement center is separate. We don't understand the impact yet of what cashless bail is going to be. I suspect that we are going to see that statewide within the next several years. We don't understand what the impact is for the potential of decriminalization of marijuana, which I think we all know is on its way. Without a decarceration plan, along with the concrete Space and Properties plan, we're working in this vacuum of assumption that something is cost prohibitive, that we need this massive footprint. And I agree, the stormwater management on that site would be really quite interesting for that much. And I get back to, it's about right-sizing this, right-sizing that footprint, and I hear this from the Healthcare Center Committee, and people who call me and talk to me, what's the right size for the beds? Is it 40 beds? Is it 60 beds? Is it 52? Is it 55? That's one of the reasons that we're looking at a study that would give us not only a business plan, but a market evaluation on the bed size, and then a decision metric for, new, old, remodeled, scrap it, whatever. So these are some of the issues that I have with this. The city is not saying, hey, county, you stink, we want you out of here. Not at all. That's not the case. And so when we get to the whereas, I can't even talk anymore, 1, 2, 3. The third whereas, current projects associated with TIF 10 will effectively hem the county in and make it increasingly difficult to answer questions surrounding parking, availability, and future expansions. We've only got one project right now, and that's the senior housing complex in the one parking lot. So even though concepts are created, that doesn't mean that they'll come to fruition. We have a concept for North Division Street. We have a concept for downtown. Those plans haven't even been presented to council yet. We just got done with stakeholder groups. So there's a number of issues with this. I agree with Supervisor Neville. Some of the language is not clear enough to give us direction, and I'm also concerned about footprint of a jail and not having a decarceration plan adjacent to this. So
Again, this is just a concept. Those things can all be talked about once we move down that road. All right. And I think that I don't think anybody was pointing the finger at the city. I think we were just stating fact. I don't know if anybody said that it was unanimous. I think they said that it was moved forward through that committee, or it was brought by that committee, or came through the city council. So with that, we're going to vote. All those in favor, vote yes, and opposed, no. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Theoretically, we should vote.
We're voting on this.
Voting on the resolution.
Everybody
I did not. I didn't touch it.
You said vote.
What are we doing?
You said vote.
There was a resolution to close. We didn't vote whether to close or not.
Kathy's going to come here.
If you lose your withdrawal, they'll let us vote.
I heard the word vote.
I did
Voting
too.
on the resolution. Do we need a motion to close the debate?
Yes.
We can vote on the debate.
So on the,
That's what we have to do first.
so I'll take a voice vote on that.
You're going to want to do a roll call on that, Mr. Chair.
On the debate, closing the debate?
Also, too, please. I would request it.
My idea.
Hold on.
Hold on, we got all kinds of apps.
Right. That's the first one.
Okay.
So just for clarification, while we clear out the votes, the next vote that the board will be taking is Supervisor Gifford, second by Matt Jakowski, to close debate. But it'll just take us a few seconds to clear the...
Don't touch it.
Yes.
You don't want to be blamed.
The motion is to close debate. All those in favor, that's the motion we're voting on. All those in favor, vote yes, and oppose no.
Closing debate.
Closing the debate.
"21 ayes, 2 nays, 2 excused. Motion to close debate carried."
I'm not calling you again.
On the resolution.
The original motion.
Oh, I thought he should.
All right, now we're back to the original motion. And the original resolution. You have a motion and a second on it?
We do.
All those in favor with the resolution, vote yes, and oppose no.
It's going to be close.
13 ayes, 10 nays, 2 excused. Amended resolution adopted.
Was passed or failed?
Resolution adopted.
We got more to go here, people.
Discussion on all that stuff.
Oh, it wasn't amended, no.
Number 8, resolution supporting local control of livestock sitting.
Resolution 134, 2018-2020, submitted by Planning and Zoning and Land and Water Conservation Committees. This resolution supports local control for livestock siting.
Motion by Matt Jakowski, Supervisor Matt Jakowski, seconded by Supervisor Moresi.
And we have we have Tom Enright that would like to speak.
Who? Tom Enright, you'd like to speak?
Oh, that's right.
Hi there. Thank you very much for considering this local control for livestock sighting advisory resolution. I'm Tommy Enright, the author, and I have a farm over in the town of Amherst. So this resolution unanimously passed through the Groundwater Citizen Advisory Committee. It unanimously passed through Planning and Zoning. It passed Land and Water 4-1, and it had a 2-2 vote at Ag and Extension. To be clear, advisory resolutions do not change laws. This isn't an ordinance. This is an advisory resolution to make a suggestion to our legislators. I also want to be clear that this is not an anti-farming resolution. As a farmer myself, including livestock, I view farmers as stewards of the land and acknowledge that they're responsible farmers at all scales of production. Furthermore, passage of this resolution would not affect any existing concentrated animal feeding operations in the county. We're not trying to shut anyone down or run anyone out of business. This resolution addresses ATCP 51, the regulation that oversees livestock sighting in the state. This law preempts local control, meaning that it's incredibly difficult for a town, county, or municipality to contest the placement of a CAFO, even if the local community has reason to oppose it. Representatives from the DNR had said on record that when the law was written, they didn't anticipate 10, 12, 14,000 animal operations. 1,000 at the time seemed huge. Representative Katrina Shankland has confirmed with the state's Ledge Council that passing this resolution places no legal liability upon the county. I believe that citizens know what's best for their own communities. From 2011 to 2016, Wisconsin lawmakers passed more than 162 measures that peeled back the decision-making power of local governments. From 2000 to 2017, the only dairy farm types that saw a rise in numbers were those over 1,000 cows. Dairies over 2,000 cows saw an over 250% increase. This is significant because smaller farms make nearly 95% of their expenditures locally, while the larger operations that I just spoke of spend less than 20% locally. Currently, an out-of-state company is trying to put a 26,000 hog operation in Burnett County, which will produce over 8 million gallons of manure annually. For those of us in Portage County, where 24% of wells test high for nitrates, myself included, this should be enough to give anyone pause. Similar stories are happening or have happened across the state and with more frequency in the last few years. Wisconsin has a very diverse geology and hydrology, and a one-size-fits-all approach like ATCP 51 does not address vulnerable areas. So what I'm really trying to get at, and what I'd like to reiterate, is that as citizens of Portage County, we know what's best for our communities. Wisconsin towns and counties should have control over what's going on in our own backyards. This is an opportunity for Portage County to take the lead on the issue, and I hope you'll join me in supporting it. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I had a longer speech, but I cut it down because I like the timer.
Any questions? Supervisor Badin.
I noticed 2 nays, Dale and Charlie, and I would like to get their response.
Supervisor O'Brien.
Farming is a tough world. We don't need to put any more stipulations on them.
Supervisor Gussel.
What was that question?
You voted nay on it, and I just wondered what your comments might be.
After second thoughts, I feel that it is better to have the state regulate it and take the responsibility for whatever laws they make, rather than in getting a separate entity like a county involved in it.
Supervisor Matt Chakowski.
Barry.
I'm sorry.
His other brother, Barry.
Supervisor Barry Chakowski. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
He's the more handsome one.
We know that.
It's obvious. Thank you, members of the body. I guess I would like to thank Tom Enright for bringing this to the committee levels. I was called an obstructionist by a member of this body because when it came to land and water, I wanted to make sure that the committee was quite well informed, and there were some people that felt I did not put it on as a vote soon enough. One of the reasons I cautioned us that we should have all the information before voting on this, because it is a land use issue, if a county or a township is going to try to regulate where an expansion goes for a CAFO or any other type, doesn't necessarily have to be, they have to actually...
Barry, can you explain what a CAFO is?
It's a concentrated animal feeding operation.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you. Thank you for asking the question. The problem with that is if you try to regulate it in one part of the town, both the, and I believe there's only, if I'm told right, there's only 2 townships that are using. One is in Fond du Lac County, the town of Loresville, is that correct? And another one, and I don't, right off the top of my memory fails me as the other one was. If you're going to try to detour it in one area of the township, you have to have another area in the township that you were going to have to try to promote it. My concern was I don't know how I was going to look at if, say, the town of Belmont, where I live in, was going to decide that we shouldn't build CAFOs in one part of the township, how we were going to look at our neighbors and say, well, we want to promote it in your part of the township. Now, I realize there may be some, hopefully there would be some legislation that would iron that out. I was just concerned when I was called an obstructionist and was looking for more information. I was concerned as to which neighbor I would look to and ask them if we can expand CAFOs in their neighborhood. Thank you.
I have a question. What's the gentleman's name? If you're letting the counties each regulate it, and depending on which way the groundwater is moving, and if they're near the county line and the groundwater is moving to the next county, if the county has control over it, the next county over is kind of at bay. Would that be correct? If it wasn't, Mr. Enright, if it wasn't regulated by the state?
Well, so...
Do you understand my example?
Sure. So ATCP 51 is already in place. I'm not asking to repeal or anything like that, just to clarify. To get to your question, though, yes, so if one county decides to allow for it, and the way that the hydrology works is that the groundwater runs into another place, absolutely, the next county gets the benefits of that placement. Does that answer your question?
So what I'm asking, though, is with what we're proposing here, where the local government has control, if each local government had control, one area is in favor of it, one area is not in favor of it, and when it's regulated by the state, isn't it standardized over the regulations over everybody versus a bunch of patch quilts all over the state, if that were to pass?
Yeah, it is standards, and again, this is just a suggestion of the state, but it is standardized. However, because of the different geology and hydrology throughout the state, I think that local communities should have more say, because if you have karst topography and it goes through cracks and moves all over.
So
there are communities.
My point would be then, if let's use Wood County as an example. If Wood County said, okay, we want to allow for a CAFO right near the Portage County line. The water is running to Portage County. Now, we have no say in it because we have no support from the state. Is that true?
I don't think that you'd have no support for the state. It would just be if the local communities want to regulate it more stringently.
Barry?
I guess you should be using Wapaka County because the waters from Portage County all go towards Woods County. But Wapaka County, the eastern, probably 2/3?
Sanctuary country?
Yep.
all runs to that watershed, the Tomorrow River watershed. So if we put one on, yes, I do understand your question, Mr. Chair. If we want to put one someplace, we should put it right on our eastern borders and let any foreseeable maybe contamination of any sort, be it dairy or be it mining or be it any other thing, that we should put it there and let Wapaka worry about it. So.
Is that a motion or?
No, it's not. It's just I do understand your question.
Yeah.
You have an answer for it.
I do not.
Okay.
Only that I'm Barry Jakowski and not Matt.
Yes. Supervisor Matt Jakowski.
Thank you, Al, or Chair Haga, excuse me. One of the things that, and I see a resolution like this as an advisory resolution, it's a conversation starter. And it's saying that the people of the county, the people here that have been elected by the people of the county want to start the conversation about this. And there are some points in it that he wants more local control. But I think what you're talking about, that would come further on as the conversation moves. You know, if you're going to change ATCP 51, it's going to take a lot more than just this resolution to do it. There's going to be public hearings. People are going to have a chance to go and testify. There's going to be local meetings about it. So this is a conversation starter. This isn't set in stone. This isn't an ordinance that's saying we're going to do this tomorrow. This is more of a conversation starter.
Sir.
Should Supervisor Gifford speak first since he's a member?
No, go ahead. I want to hear what you have
Okay, I wanted to add on that that another part of this resolution is in regard to the technical committee that makes recommendations for changes on ATCP 51. So since 2010, they have met every 4 years to make recommendations, and so far none of those have been taken into account at all. So 2 months ago, the technical committee made recommendations once again, and part of this resolution is asking our legislators to let those see the light of day. So we could see improvements with the current regulation just by having it just have shining a spot on it. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Supervisor Johnson.
I say let's do it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next time we have to order pizza.
I'm getting hungry too.
Yeah, or subs or something. Yeah, whatever. Supervisor Jim Gifford and I both serve on WCA's Environment and Land Use Steering Committee. I serve as staff from Marathon County, and of course Supervisor Gifford serves from this body. At the most recent meeting, there was a presentation by the Farm Bureau. Two of their chief advocates and lobbyists, I guess you could probably call that. And this is on their agenda. This is one of the primary things that they want to focus on, that in increasing money for well compensation for low-income families trying to replace their wells when their wells are contaminated with nitrates. So there were two things that they talked about. Primarily was a resolution similar to this that they'd like to see advanced across the state. And again, that's the Farmers Union. And then the other one was associated with well compensation dollars to low-income families. So.
Supervisor Bob Gifford.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. I was really glad that Tommy Enright brought this to the board, because when I first ran for county board after Krems retired, I asked Town of Hull Chairman John Holdridge, what should be my issues? What should I talk about? He said, adequate water and clean water and local control. And he told me to get a hold of Katrina Shanklin about the local control problem. And she has been kept me in the loop over the past few years. When I first heard from her, there were 160 separate enactments by the legislature restricting local control or imposing unfunded mandates. Now it's up to about 180, and this is only since 2010, right? So it's a general principle we're getting at. We look at why the state legislature is constantly restricting local control. We follow the money back to big business lobby groups who not only lobby, but they put our legislators in place for us, okay, with spending the amount of money they spend. So it's just a general principle of good government, local control, grassroots democracy. I mean, how can you argue against that? That's my point.
Any other comments? Thank you. All those in favor, vote yes, and oppose no.
All right, try it again.
19 ayes, 2 nays, 1 abstained, and 3 excused. Resolution adopted.
Number 9, authorizing and ratifying a contract for the Portage County Highway Department above-ground scale.
Resolution 135, 2018-2020, submitted by Highway Committee approving the above-ground scale contract.
Motion by Supervisor Laddock, second by Supervisor Zdroik. Discussion. None. All those in favor vote yes and opposed no. Aren't you glad you waited, Nate?
22 ayes, 3 excused. Resolution adopted.
Number 10, authorization for 2019 amended contracts over $100,000 for the Health and Human Service Department.
Resolution 136, 2018-2020, submitted by Health and Human Services Board amending a Health and Human Services contract.
Motion by Supervisor Bob Gifford, seconded by Supervisor Medine. Discussion. All those in favor of the yes and opposed no.
Sit there.
22 ayes, 3 excused. Resolution adopted.
We'll take a motion and adjourn by Supervisor Barry Jakowski, seconded by Supervisor Dubek. All those in favor of that, we are adjourned.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.